Hello, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to the Three Wonks episode. I think we're on episode 22. I kind of just took a guess on the title. But we've been doing this for a while, okay? Look, we started in late December last time around. Now it's literally almost November, okay? We've got what is it? Like a week or two until November. We've been doing this for a while at this point. Every 2 weeks, about 20 episodes. So 22 sounds about right to me. I think that's right. Today, we're going to be talking about whether or not the central bank should engage in UBI-like or literal UBI policies. That was the audience topic as voted on by our Patreons. Patreon.com/the3wonks. Become a member today and have a say on what we talked about last week on a week-to-week basis. Our Patreons last time, there was a comment in our Patreon audience poll, quote, all bangers, I don't know. We had a lot of banger topics. One of our topics that we were maybe going to talk about, and it was a close vote. It was 3 to 3 to 4 to 3 to 5. Okay, we do approval voting, of course, so you can vote for all or none of these. Okay, we have, does Jay Powell deserve to be Times Person of the Year? What country has the best economy in the world? Charity, what is its proper role in the economy? What should the U.S. do about military spending and foreign aid? And the topic that finally won, should the central bank use UBI as a tool for inflation? A lot of bangers. Become a Patreon and choose amongst them if you choose to become a Patreon. $3 a month, guys. Sink it in. Other than that, we're going to be talking about why Congress matters. We obviously the presidential election gets a whole lot of coverage, obviously, because it probably is more important as a singular person than any one member of Congress, I guess, as part of our system. But of course, as an entity, Congress and who controls Congress matters, okay? And so as we ramp up to the election, we're going to be doing, we already have been doing, a lot of election coverage. And so we're going to be talking about the legislative agenda of the Democrats and how we might think about the potential consequences of the Republicans controlling Congress, even if a Democrat ends up winning the presidency, kind of what's on the line, right? We have Kamala's very skinny policy platform, but obviously the congressional agenda could be a lot more expansive. What might we know in terms of the signals that have been provided to us of what the policy agenda will be should we have a unified Democratic government? That would be pretty interesting. Okay, so we're going to look into that a little bit and, kind of talk about some of these policies as well. Also, last thing before we get into the main topics of the show, of course, okay, we're in the final four. Ladies and gentlemen, the final four on the policy bracket, all right? We only have 4 options left. We have, against all odds, he can't keep getting away with it, abolish the Electoral College in the semifinal against single-payer healthcare, okay? If single-payer healthcare loses to abolish the Electoral College, you guys who are voting, you're a little too election-brained. I'll say it. All right, that would be a ridiculous choice if you ask me. My God, guys, there are some things.
Institutions, permanently shaping institutions in a way that could save our democracy multiple times, might seem more important and makes single payer itself more likely, systematically in the long term. But I guess
proportional representation would be a bigger deal than abolishing the Electoral College.
Well, that's not on the ballot right now, though.
But people don't vote for that. That's what I'm saying. Abolish the Electoral College has beaten things like publicly funded elections, ending gerrymandering.
True.
And obviously sectoral bargaining, which ends, authoritarianism in the workplace, obviously, but we don't care about that on this channel. But the point is, though, is that, guys, some things are more important. It's 18% of GDP spent frivolously on healthcare. Single payer could bring that down to 12, 13%. You could literally save, what would that be? That would be hundreds of billions of dollars a year in frivolous medical expenditure. Vote for single payer healthcare, guys. That would be ridiculous. And then on the other matchup, this is the semifinal that I was not looking forward to because I might be disappointed in the result. We've got land value tax versus an $80 per ton plus $15 per ton escalating each year carbon tax and a dividend system versus a land value tax, like I said. That'll be an interesting one. That's the finale in my view. Whoever wins that match is going to win the finale almost certainly. But guys, seriously, put your socialist and social democratic hats on for a second. The finale's obvious. It should be single-payer healthcare versus a carbon tax. Just let's get real here. Let's get real. Let's get serious. I know Mike has had his fun. Let's stop, dragging him along. Let's stop taking him seriously now. Let's vote him out of this tournament. They can have the bronze medal match between abolish the electoral college land value tax. But go on the Three Wonks Twitter, the pinned tweet, vote for social democracy down the ballot. Of course, that's my recommendation.
Or vote for real change.
Of course. Now, that's the not the social democratic policy. That's the Wonk policy tournament, guys. The finale will coincide. The finale in the bronze medal match will coincide with our final show before the election. If you have any suggestions for what we should talk about in 2 weeks, again, in 2 weeks, it'll be the weekend before the election. We've timed this out pretty perfectly. Please let us know. Okay, you'll be voting in the finale. Results will be finalized after the election. We'll talk about that in the subsequent 2 weeks. But then also, we've got that one show right before the election, the Saturday before. So please let us know what you want us to talk about. If there's anything special. Otherwise, we're probably just going to do a lot of election coverage, guys, because of course we are. Okay, we're obsessed with the election on this show. And it's been difficult to, not talk about it every week, basically. So anyway, that's everything, guys. All right, Micah, you suggested this topic. You said we got to talk about the legislative agenda and why it's important to elect a Democratic Congress. Micah, why is this so important? Why can't we just look at Kamala's agenda and just kind of expect that that's what we, that's what's on the table, essentially, if Kamala wins this election?
Yeah, so here's the problem. People look at presidential platforms as if that determines what Congress is going to do. Now, a quick lesson in government is that the president doesn't write the laws, at least so long as Trump doesn't become a dictator. The Congress writes the laws. And that means the Congress actually establishes the legislative agenda. That's the reason why, despite many of Trump's very radical proposals in 2016, his actual legislative accomplishments, quote unquote, were really standard Republican stuff in the vein of Paul Ryan, because Paul Ryan was the Speaker of the House. So I want us to talk a little bit about the new Democrat coalition's economic plan, because it's very well fleshed out. Now, for those of you who don't know, the new Democrat coalition is the second to first biggest caucus of Democrats in the House. The other one, big Democratic caucus that's ideological, is the Progressive Caucus, which is the more left-wing one. The New Democrat Caucus is the more moderate one. There's also the Blue Dogs, which is more conservative and right-wing on the Democratic side, but it's pretty small. So to start out, one of the things that they include in here is liberalizing trade with friendly nations. How do we feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we're going to be mostly in agreement with that. But again, it's a little bit vague. But that's a good principle to sort of establish. I guess it also depends on what we mean by friendly nation.
So they actually list some examples. They list like Taiwan, the UK, like ally countries. I think those are pretty uncontentious. But a big part of their agenda is trying to lower costs by reducing trade barriers and adding in more exceptions to tariffs. So it's nice.
Very reasonable. I mean, my understanding, to be fair, is that, we don't really tariff very much. I mean, what was like the weighted average tariff rate before Trump was like below 1% or something, right? So,
we actually have a plenty of tariffs.
No, in terms of quantity of things that are tariffed, I'm sure that quantity is very high, but the actual cost of those tariffs is aggregately quite small, is my understanding. Like, we used to have average tariff rates of 50, 60, 70% or something, but now it's extremely small, even under the reciprocal tariffs under Trump. But obviously that would go up to historical highs if Trump were to win. But anyway, liberalizing trade even more, probably a good idea, guys.
Even more. I don't know. Maybe we should do a comprehensive review of all existing tariffs, because my understanding is that tariffs hit a lot of products that are not just Chinese. Like, they hit European Union products, Canadian products, UK products, Asian products.
The amount of products that is hit is not really. I'm just saying that the cost of these tariffs is very, very. The weighted average tariff rate is very low. It's very small. Again, it should probably be zero again. For goods coming out of the EU or places like that, right? But I don't know how much that would actually solve our supply chain.
Well, like for instance, with things like baby formula, it seems like our import prohibitions were one of the big contributors to our shortage. So I think it'd be pretty valuable. But this document is so great because it's almost like it was written by somebody just like me, because you want to know what's next on this document? Reducing occupational licensing restrictions. Thank you, Jesus. Amen. Like, take that to the freaking bank. Okay. Who can say that Democrats aren't better in economic policy? We got reducing occupational licensing restrictions. Now, for those of you who do not know, maybe newer viewers of the podcast, what is an occupational licensing restriction, SDL?
It's just a requirement that someone has to get a certain training license in order to get employment in a certain field. So, for example, you might need to get, say, 1 year of training to be a hairdresser or hair cutter.
Right. And occupational licensing restrictions are terrible. Just kidding. They're not all bad. But a lot of them are unnecessary. There's huge variation in amongst states and how many the occupational licensing barriers for certain professions. And we don't see that generates a huge difference in safety, but it does generate a difference in cost. Occupational licensing is, go ahead.
I was going to say something that Micah didn't mention. I don't know if you mentioned it. This is the agenda of the new Democrat coalition, right? These are like the liberals and the centrists of the Democratic Party. And we'll talk about that later, Micah. We'll talk about this agenda later. All right. We're getting to the good stuff here, but there's some opportunity cost in this agenda, if you ask me. But anyway, keep going.
Okay. Yeah, you're going to say, why don't they just do socialism or some cringe stuff?
Correct.
So, yeah, occupational licensing can be really wasteful. It increases cost. It prohibits a lot of people, especially lower income people, from accessing higher paying jobs. And, a lot of times it's unnecessary. Also, occupational licenses are often not portable. So you can be licensed in one state, not be licensed in another state. That's just wasteful because people have to go through the same licensure procedure. Let me give you one example, which is near and dear to my heart. My mom used to be a hairdresser. She got licensed, fantastic hairdresser. Her license expired. What'd she do? She kept cutting hair in her house. Okay, FBI, sue us. But she couldn't cut hair anywhere else. So she just had to go through the entire licensure procedure again, which took her so much time and took so much money and didn't teach her anything.
That whole
what
time,
a waste of human resources.
Micah and his siblings going without haircuts, okay, fuzzing out, unbelievable.
Illegal, illicit haircuts, okay? Black market haircuts, that's what we were getting.
Well, so one question from the chat, Micah, is how can the federal government affect state licensing requirements since those are at the state level?
So, like I said, I'm not a lawyer yet. But it seems like there's two things you can do, and this is a congressional favorite. Give them money to change. Okay, give them money. Say, hey, if you can get it where only 25% of your population requires occupational licensure for their job, or some sort of threshold like that. There's going to be some sort of threshold which is fitting and doesn't cause any problems. We will give you money for it. I think that'd be effective. Also, I believe there's laws you can make which standardize licensure across states and require mutual recognition of licenses. That is a really low-hanging fruit, which I think would have very little cons.
Yeah, I was going to mention that. I think you could probably argue that the U.S. Congress has the constitutional right to regulate at least some attempt to standardize that, insofar as the labor market is a cross-national, like crosses the state borders. So it's therefore within the U.S. Congress's remit.
So they also want to formalize the restrictions from Lena Khan on non-compete agreements. Okay, this is one that should make y'all happy. What is a non-compete agreement, Econoboy?
Non-compete agreement is essentially it's a contract that you sign typically when you're just hired right off the gate. I'm not sure if maybe there's like mid-hiring non-compete agreements that exist, maybe as you get promotions or something, but basically, it says that if you were to quit or you were to get fired under certain circumstances, you're not allowed to get a job in the same or substantially the same industry. The problem with these non-compete agreements, I guess like the ideal non-compete agreement is like you're an Apple engineer who's working on the new iPhone, and you've learned all this new technological advancement, and you get fired or quit, and you spitefully go over to Google, and then you share all of this new technological advancement to Google for free, or on condition of your employment, which of course is like almost like a form of corporate espionage. And so that's like the ideal of what a non-compete agreement is. But functionally, what it turns into is like, you could say like the financial analyst who works for an oil company, he can't work for another oil company for 6 months. And it's like, bro, why would this be a thing? This just restricts my mobility. And obviously to the extent that we're creating frictions to hiring people, that is a market inefficiency.
Right. So, the big issue is you're reducing competition over workers. And that's bad because the only way people get paid the amount that they should is if there's multiple different employers bidding up the price so that it ends up getting their wages close to the value that they produce. Okay. We don't want that surplus value exploitation in the marketplace. And so the non-competing agreement says, no, actually, you can't go work somewhere else. And what's so interesting is that non-compete agreements have been used in places we'd all probably agree is inappropriate, like Walmart. Walmart workers not allowed to go work at Target. It's clearly just a ploy, not to protect intellectual property or strategy, but to make workers have a worse bargaining position. And mind you, you can always make people sign an NDA if you don't want them to disclose something. It's called a non-disclosure agreement. You can compete, but not disclose.
So I did think it was interesting. The New Democratic Coalition, the centrist coalition, linked to a specific bill called HR. It's now 731 in the most recent Congress, the Workforce Mobility Act of Year. And their proposal was that non-compete agreements should actually just be banned, pretty much, with only two exceptions. One of which is if you're a senior executive, which seems fine. Like, what you probably shouldn't be like senior executing two competing firms. That's fine. And the other is if you sell your business, then there could be a geographic restriction, which is like, just don't start a new one here for 6 months or whatever. And again, that feels like a fine restriction. Like, it'd be pretty bad if you sold your pizzeria and then just set one up across the street or whatever. I get why that might be in there, but that's the only exceptions they list. I was actually surprised it was so short. I expected there to be some weird thing in there that would be like a favorite to Google or something, but there just isn't. The only thing the act does, just to finish it, is sort of what Micah says. It says there is no way that the act should be construed to prohibit things which prevent the protection of trade secrets. So it might be stuff like a non-disclosure agreement, for example. But honestly, pretty interesting. It's a sweeping ban.
Based.
Yeah. Listen, can I talk about something that's cringe on this platform, Micah? Micah, he's like, oh, I'm a centrist. The centrists are best, okay? But he's being awfully quiet about part of this agenda, okay? And it's a part that we lambast over and over again. It's the problem. It's the worst thing about the centrists, okay? Let's go to section 7, the first dot. Establish a well-targeted enhanced child tax credit. Now listen, Micah, give me a second here, all right? We go over to the Progressive Caucus agenda. What is their sentence on the child tax credit? Reestablish the American Rescue Plan expanded and improved child tax credit to provide a fully refundable monthly payment to working class families without work requirements or administrative burdens. All right, that's the base.
It might still be means tested. It might still be means tested.
Look, without administrative burdens, I choose to interpret this in the most favorable light. All right, but you know what it doesn't say.
Maybe they just.
Okay, Micah, stop. We know that they're talking about work requirements, fucking means testing nonsense. This is what the centrist coalition always advocates for.
So let's be clear here. Democrats have not advocated for work requirements since probably like the 1990s, from my understanding. Romney is the one who got work requirements added in to the child tax credit compromise that the New Dems were working on. But my understanding is that New Dems wanted it to be fully refundable, and they agreed with the Progressive Caucus that it should be means tested. So thank you very much. You tried to find an example in which we were cringe, but we turned out to be equally cringe with your team.
Listen, now, I doubt, Micah. We'll see. Look, we'll see. We'll see who gets in charge and who's running things when the Democrats take over the House. We'll see.
Yeah, try to pass a bill, guys. Now, returning back to the earlier portion of the document, they want to invest in workforce development, including apprenticeship and on-the-job training programs. This is great, okay? We need to invest in education, but more vocational education, because right now, if you look at college degrees, they're subsidized to, I think it's like for every $1 that we subsidize apprenticeships, we spend $10 on a like per capita basis for people's university degrees. There's a huge difference in the amount of subsidies that we allocate. And that is distortionary because I don't think we have a good reason to believe that college degrees are preferable to apprenticeships or these other job training, pursuits. So we should probably subsidize them equally, which means that if we're going to pass new subsidies, we should focus on the stuff that we haven't been subsidizing historically. What do we think about that?
I think in general, you'll find pretty unanimous agreement, even amongst Republicans. Now, oftentimes with Republicans, they'll say, I agree with this, and then it's like they just don't ever do anything about it. It's like, your classic, like your do nothing, type B son who just never goes to college, always says he's going to, never does. That's like the Republicans. But then you've got like your type A daughter who's like a doctor and finishing her second fucking doctorate degree or some shit. Like that's like the Democrats, right? You'll have a lot of Republicans who will say things like, well, I actually agree in principle with, expanding the child tax credit or family leave policies or unionization. It's like, okay, well, I mean, you've literally done nothing about it and voted against every Democratic proposal to do that. And so, I think that's unfortunately that's the movement that that's the sort of political spectrum that we're in right now. But I like it, Micah.
Well, what do you agree, SDL?
I think it's fine. I was looking through the child tax credit bill they supported, which I believe this Congressional Progressive Caucus also supported, and I do not see any work requirements in there.
It owned economy.
So I do wonder. It might just be no economy. I will say when I read that, I was like, oh no, this is some dumb capitulation to the Romneyites.
No, listen.
It seems like they're not actually supporting it though.
I'm not saying that the final CTC that'll get passed under the whole Democratic big tent will include work requirements. I'm just saying you have to beat these filthy centrists into the ground over their work requirement nonsense. And that's what the Democrats need to do. All right.
I just don't see any work requirements anywhere, but
look, I'm just glad that the new Democratic coalition has embraced universalist socialism, right? They want every kid to get a Fidel Castro t-shirt and 3,000
universal opportunity, okay? American opportunity, okay? Now, next bullet point, something that I know SDL believes in very strongly, we're going to secure the border. The border is going to be sealed tight, but we're going to give amnesty to the dreamers. And we're going to fix the asylum system by hiring more judges. And we're going to make sure that we have an immigration system that meets our workforce needs, which what does that mean? That means more visas, more high skill immigration, more all kinds of work-based immigration. I love it.
Yeah.
Are we looking at slightly, just as an aside on ordering, are we looking at slightly different documents? I'm looking at the PDF. Are you looking at the TLDR that they posted on the website?
The first thing that's linked. But I made bullet points just to take the most interesting stuff.
I'm opening up the PDF. I wanted to read the full.
Well, no, I was looking at the PDF. It's the full one.
Yeah. It's like section 1, section 2, section 3.
Yeah. But I think when we talked about immigration, however long ago, about the immigration crisis or whatever, was I think we all agreed that the sort of administrative process of immigration, whatever that actually ends up shaking out to be, should be highly efficient, right? We should have a lot of state capacity when it comes to processing immigration and asylum claims. And so insofar as that's basically what this bill does. I think that the issue, though, is that the progressives in the Democratic Party are kind of in a bind where progressives generally like, obviously, more liberal immigration schemes. And so insofar as people can come here and claim asylum and then work productively for several years, well, that's great. We want people to come here and work and be productive members of our society. But the problem that, the progressives have is that a lot of the time stuff like this is just the only thing that's proposed. It's like, okay, well, we're going to fund a bunch of ICE enforcement officers and immigration, judge enforcement to kick out these asylees as quickly as possible, basically. But it's like, what are we going to do with all these undocumented immigrants that are here? And what are we going to do about the fact that we want, the flow of immigration to, maintain itself to some degree in order to ensure that we have an increasing population, a talented labor force, things like that. And that's that second part that's more politically difficult, that doesn't get a lot of play, it seems.
I mean, we did have this conversation related to the bill, and like the problem that I have is that when you give people who cross the border a lawyer, something like 3/4 of them win their case. Like, it's an incredibly high rate. So what's frustrating to me is that, yeah, there's a lot of people who come here who could plausibly claim asylum, who could plausibly claim risk of being like hurt at their home. And if the argument is simply, well, we should let all these people in, we should have the court case to the court, the number of staffers on the court, the number of judges on the court to enable that to come in, that's great. It's just in practice, I don't think that's how this is going to be used. Well, like when you look at the bill, it has monthly mandatory maximums for how many people can cross the border.
At non-ports of entry. At non-ports of entry.
That's true. There is an exception. But the idea that we should be so, like, in other words, what's frustrating is that we used to have a much more humane immigration policy. People came over, they got a court case, and then they just sort of hung around until it happened. And we processed them fast enough in like 2, 3, 4, 5 months that it just sort of worked itself out. The problem here is that, like, we could just let people come over. We could just let them hang out. We have for some reason decide that we have to incarcerate 50,000 people. We have to like track like 1 million people. When we don't do that, it just works out. We did a pilot program like this in the late Obama administration. In fact, it was handed out to a private company, so Micah should like it. Where they farmed out like the administration of this to some like private company. It was called, I think, the Family Care Program. I can pull up the exact title. And 99% of the people who had a court date came back. Like, they didn't need to lock them up. They didn't even need to track them. People who wanted to be here went to the court date because they want to be here. Like, it's just frustrating. The humane system is right there. We did it for years and years and years. And then Reagan came along and decided he really, really hated Cubans and created the modern hell that is our immigration system. I think we should return to tradition, okay?
Return to tradition. I mean, we already had a border bill. We already had a video on the border. But I do think that in our current political environment, the median voter wants mass deportations. Like, the polls on this are really terrible, and it's the biggest losing issue for Democrats. And there is certain problems with the border. I mean, people exaggerate the problems, but there is human trafficking. There is some drug smuggling. There's also outflow of American weapons to Mexico. Underrated border problem. We're exporting guns to Mexican gangs, which is still bad because we care about Mexicans on this podcast. We're woke, okay? So, listen, it should be legal, it should be safe, it should be orderly. How do you do that? Spam ICE officers, spam courts, okay? So many courts, 1 trillion billion courts, 1 trillion billion lawyers, okay? Give me a job. Okay, so, and amnesty. I love amnesty. We love amnesty on this podcast. We love work-based visas and immigration expansions. Give me more of that. The next thing is reforming the permitting process to speed up approvals. Now, folks, tell me what the biggest barrier is to the proliferation of clean energy in this country.
Your mom.
The second biggest, then. Yeah, it's true.
You're right. The permitting process is too slow, and it's slowing out the rollout of clean energy. Good point, Micah.
The Inflation Reduction Act. Biden passed the Inflation Reduction Act. What was that? He said, if you want to build solar panels, if you want to build new, electric transmission infrastructure, the federal government will throw $1 trillion. It will deposit $1 trillion in your bank account, okay? We will pay you so much money. And then what happened? Almost nothing. Why? Because nobody can get a gosh dang permit. You want to build a new transmission line? Okay. Go through environmental review. Check this box. Check that box. $150 trillion later and 5 years later, you finally got your permit. And that adds so much cost and time to a clean energy transition, which needs to happen quickly. So it's great that they want to reform the process to make it much faster.
Yeah, I mean, this is a very, you could look very experimentally on this. Like Micah mentions transmission. In Texas, for instance, transmission costs are socialized, right? So to the extent that there's a lot of costs associated with getting your interconnection agreements and your permitting done for actually establishing, let's say, like a solar, big solar farm, that cost is socialized, so you don't have to internalize it to the project. So the guy building the solar farm doesn't have to pay for it. It's ratepayers who pay for transmission infrastructure. And in some regards, this just makes sense, right? I mean, this is like kind of just a social good to build transmission infrastructure. We all rely on it. The grid is sort of socialized and function anyway through the RTO system. And so one of the reasons why Texas is able to build so much renewable energy, solar coming online now, but historically Texas has been a wind powerhouse, is just because projects don't have to internalize those costs. Your hurdle rates for making an investment decision are much lower because that huge cost doesn't have to be burdened by the developer. But that's, arguably not really a root cause thing, right? Where it's like the process itself just shouldn't be so expensive, right? And so this is something where the federal government could provide incentives or points-based systems, or obviously, to the extent that they can, make the federal permitting process and environmental review process a lot more streamlined. Like, a lot of people get a little wigged out when Democrats talk about, reforming environmental review, but that's because people don't understand what environmental review is. Environmental review is not, hey, the federal government wants to see if you're going to harm the environment by building X, Y, or Z, right? That's not what this is. And, the federal government's going to deny you a permit if you harm the environment. That's not what environmental review is. That's what people think it is, because that's what it sounds like. Environmental review is just the government asking, how does this project affect the environment? Oh, this is how it affects the environment? All right.
550 pages later, like 3 years of study. Does this solar panel make the environment better or worse? Okay.
Yeah, well, and the example of this that people like to point to for an obvious example is congestion pricing in New York City. Like, the effect of taxing people for driving is going to be less driving. It's not that complicated. Like, you could figure out exactly how much it's going to reduce it, right? You could actually produce a 500-page thing on that, but you don't need to. You know the direction is going to be negative. And what are people going to do in New York City? Well, they're going to ride the other things like public transit, which are lower carbon. So, like, directionally, the impact is going to be lower carbon. The amount is sort of hard to figure out, but you don't need to care as long as the direction is negative, which is going to be for like 99% of renewable energy. And yet, I believe the report on congestion pricing was something like 900 pages long. After all that, the governor sunk it because she wanted to be able to drive into this one shop on Saturday.
And a lot of times, like, I think the key here about at least the environmental review process and, like, state level.
Can I add one last thing on that?
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, the Hochul suggested, according to some anonymous sources, that she may be interested in getting a federal position, and I just strongly support her becoming an ambassador to Canada. I think that if the Dems win, please make her an ambassador. I don't care where, just some sort of ambassadorship. Please, 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 please.
Ambassador to Somalia.
It's important to note.
Go away.
It's important to note that these environmental review and permitting processes are done under two circumstances, or they're done like in consequence in two circumstances. One, a lot of the times these don't actually prevent harms to the environment. They just add delays to the development process and costs to the development process, right? Like, the reason why, I don't know, like 80% of the reason why environmental manager as a job exists is basically just for these permitting things. Like, this is dead weight loss, right? There's no reason for a lot of these jobs to actually exist. There's probably more productive things for these people to do. What was the second thing I was going to say? I forgot. Damn it. There were two things that I was going to mention that were really, really key. When it comes to
too busy daydreaming about Hochul being assigned to an ambassador to the UN.
True. But yeah, environmental review is just, and permitting processes in general. The other circumstance that I was going to say was that we have to keep in mind that landowners, like, we imagine the libertarian paradise, right? Somebody owns a bunch of land, guy who has the ability to develop a solar plant, they meet, they agree, I'll pay you X, Y, and Z for access to your land or for the land outright, and then I either own the land or I own access to the land, and I can build my solar farm. We think that that's how it works, but isn't there someone you forgot to ask? Oh, you forgot to ask the local county government and the local state government and the federal government and do all these permitting processes. And, oh, there's like a movement of middle-aged mothers who just thinks that, lithium-ion batteries are going to create a nuclear explosion that's going to destroy their entire city. And you have to listen to how, oh, this guy wearing a Make America Great Again hat, he thinks that wind turbines cause cancer, and that's why he doesn't want wind turbines built in his community. My God, the development delays. You think it's difficult to build housing in San Francisco? Good God. Try to build a renewable energy project or a carbon capture plant or just any big piece of infrastructure. It's very, very NIMBY intensive as a process. And it's very annoying, obviously, to deal with for developers.
I have news for the members of the audience. In this country, we do too many studies. Okay, stop studying. Just be belligerent. Just do stuff. Okay.
Well, I mean, we
ask the community for too much input. I don't care about your input. Oh, you have an opinion? Sorry, I didn't ask for your opinion. I don't care about your opinion. Oh, local community members dislike the project? Good. I don't care. No.
I do think it is sort of funny. There is an argument that America has too much yapping and too much community input, and that community input is not actually a democratic process, that it's better to let representatives handle this, just because those are truly democratic elections rather than people who have the time to show up at 2 p.m. on a Thursday to the zoning board meeting, which will tend to be people who are not employed and really, really care about improving their home value and do not care at all about anything that actually matters. Or lobbyists.
And that's why the community should have
their
no
job is.
For democracy. And just to give you one other example of this, in 2008, that is the year that California started its high-speed rail project. What was the year in which it got it fully done with environmental review? We don't know, because it still hasn't happened. I believe some portions of it have completed environmental review, but I don't believe the entire thing has completed environmental review. And that is just to illustrate, what is the effect of high-speed rail on emissions? I don't know. Why don't we spend 15 years figuring out how good it is or bad it is, and we'll approve it no matter what. Thank you very much.
Well, that's the real frustration with all this environmental review, is that it's at the end like just a suggestion, unless I believe there's like one category where it could be so bad they would deny it, but for like 99% of things, it's just look at this 500-page document of suggestions. Good luck, have fun. We're not going to change anything. Like it would really be so much better if we just had like things that you have to do or not, like a binary. You have to do this thing or not. You've got to care about the wetlands or not. Like just no review, just get it done like today. And
Right,
just
that's why like a points, like just a simple points-based system would be a lot better. It's one of the reasons why like immigration as an example, like a points-based immigration system is significantly more efficient, because even if immigration is very restrictive under a points-based system, you at least have objective metrics to know whether or not you will be granted certain kinds of visas. And similarly, you could like SDL said, you could just have basic things like you're banned from doing this or that, or certain things have like explicit carve out exceptions. Like that would be a more efficient system.
Or no permitting. Or automatic by right permitting for everybody. Yeah. How about that? I like that idea. Now,
and to be clear, there are actually problems with that kind of thing, which is that like I'm sure we're familiar with like the fact that there's disproportionate impact of pollution on low income and like minority people, and that's a downstream thing of being too willing to permit polluting stuff. At the same time, like the solution there seems to be that there's some things which are obviously polluting and some things which are obviously not. So why are we not carving out the things which are obviously not, like congestion pricing or high-speed rail? Like, I'm sorry, where's the soot coming out of the high-speed trade? Like there's just, it's ridiculous to treat these things all the same.
Well, and not all that has to be done in the permitting process. I mean, air quality regulators don't really do their job in the state of Texas, but what they should say is within a certain region, they have air quality monitors. If you have too much of a toxic pollutant in the air, like benzene, everybody gets fined super hard until you reduce it, or they just shut you down. And so companies know, if I enter this area, I'm going to get fined a crazy amount by opening a new pollutant refinery. So there's different ways to do this. But anyway, it's a huge sleeper policy. Centrists out here again, doing that kind of bipartisan stuff that can pass and will save the planet. I love them. Now, here's the next point. Investing in public research and development to support green energy and emissions reduction technology in the areas where that are like long-term and where market investment are unlikely to happen. My God, is that a beautiful plan? What do we think about that?
We're big fans of research and development on this here podcast. So anything that we can do to encourage that is important. People again, SDL. I think SDL mentioned it in our like, what does the U.S. do right episode. I wasn't able to find statistics on like public R&D as a percent of GDP. I just couldn't find that when I was really looking for it. But maybe if I spent a whole day trying to find it, I could find it. But overall R&D, the U.S. is amongst the top in the world for actually just per person, like as a percent of GDP, just funneling a ton of money into R&D, and it is not an insignificant reason as to why the U.S. is such a powerhouse. And so tax incentives and subsidies that encourage private R&D and just direct public investment in R&D is amongst the most productive investment that the government can make. And we spend 3-4% of GDP, make it 5% of GDP or something. Like you could spend a lot more on this even under the U.S. framework and probably get a lot of benefits in exchange for that.
Yeah, I mean, something that I've said over and over is that public R&D has enormous externalities, like positive externalities, even more so than private R&D. And so insofar as we can find areas where those externalities exist, we should be funding them. Like we're leaving money on the table by not doing so. So,
right.
Yeah.
And they also want to enact full expensing for R&D, and that is making it fully deductible. So there's no corporate income tax that's paid on R&D. Another sleeper banger policy, which sort of kind of maybe happened for temporarily for a time, I think already, but who knows?
Right.
Federally banning discriminatory zoning. I was shocked when I saw this because I didn't know it was legal, and it probably isn't. But if it is legal, holy based.
I mean, the argument they're going to give is that the housing market crosses state borders, presumably, and something expansive commerce clause.
Based. That is like that is a maximally based like policy. Okay, for you, those of you who don't know, I don't know how you're watching this and you don't know, but what is the issue with discriminatory zoning, Econoboy?
Hold on, I'm yelling at one of my Discord members who's a Twitter employee. Anyway, the problem with discriminatory zoning, it depends on what you mean. So when you say discriminatory zoning, do you mean like not allowing certain people to live certain places, or do you mean like not allowing certain types of developments?
So I'm assuming they mean exclusionary zoning.
Yeah, like I assume that they just meant to write exclusionary.
like excluding certain kinds of developments, you're saying.
Right. Excluding like lower income people, excluding like multifamily.
Yeah, the issue with that is that it's just, again, it creates market inefficiency, right? Like you could just imagine that private developers come into a location and they just, hey, we're going to build densely in this area. We're going to build industrially in this area. People a lot of times will use Houston as an example where, Houston doesn't have incredibly strict zoning ordinances or codes. Obviously, it's a bit misleading to say that Houston has no zoning requirements, but certainly we have a much more liberal zoning system than other cities. And you don't really see like giant, waste dumps that are placed right next to elementary schools, right? I mean, you just don't really see that. And oftentimes, when we think of Americana and we think of the sort of classic American densely packed townhome style walkable city, those cities were built in the context of basically no zoning requirements, right? And so that's important to keep in mind as well. It just seems like when private actors come together, there's a logical plan and there's sort of a quasi sort of social zoning that happens already. We don't really need the government to come in and regulate that super strictly.
I just did want to say one of the bills specifically linked by the New Democratic Coalition is titled HR 3507, the Yes in My Backyard Act. So it's funny, they're embracing the label. However, the bill itself is a nothing burger. It just asks people before they get a housing grant to submit a plan to implement a list of things which YIMBY types would like. And that's it. So it's just saying, like, Texas, before you get housing money, please write us a 3-paragraph essay about how you would like multifamily zoning.
Well, so I think there's maybe it's just like really pragmatic and like it could be a tool for advocates. Like surely I would use that as a tool as an advocate, but obviously it's the YIMBY bill is not, going to stop the housing crisis. But just for those of you who don't know, the definition of exclusionary zoning is zoning restrictions put in place that is prejudicial towards people based on race or class. So zoning restrictions that are saying we don't want working class people here or we don't want people of color here. And it goes back all the way to the early 20th century where segregation was going away, but they wanted to keep it. And so they used zoning restrictions to try to achieve the same purpose and say, hey, look at all these working class African Americans. Let's just make it where the housing they can afford is not located anywhere near our neighborhood. Right. And so it has a very dark history, and it's part of the reason why so many cities are economically and racially segregated today. So that is incredible. They also want to tie federal dollars to local land use deregulation. They liked this idea before it was cool. Kamala is now championing this idea, but it's basically saying, hey, you want federal money, local city? Okay, why don't you stop being cringe on housing? Okay, why don't you start legalizing building housing? So that's great. They also want to tie it to local permitting reform. Now, this is an underrated issue. A lot of cities have what we call discretionary development permitting, which means that the city ultimately can just deny a permit if they want to for really any reason. Permits are not granted by right. Even if you follow every letter of the law, they can stop you from having it. Or maybe they can't stop you from having it, but they have no time limit in giving you a permit. So they'll say, oh, we're still looking at this. I know it's been 3 years, but we're just really swamped over here. there's a story that actually about my neighborhood in which a very big high rise, which is going to be like 220, 230 units of housing, was stopped from getting a permit for like 2 years because all of the neighborhood associations didn't like it. And they petitioned their city council member to put pressure on the planning department or the public works department not to get them a permit. So this would say, hey, if you want federal money, you gotta fix that permitting system. You got to make it where it only takes 3 months, where it's by right, yada, yada, yada.
Yeah, these are all good things. I mean, I think we've been in favor of a carrot and stick approach on this show pretty openly, where it's like, look, if the federal, I think there's a reasonable collective social interest in this regard. Like, it's a very sort of defensible, just like moral position to take. Look, if the federal government, if the nation's people as a collective is going to be giving you money for various housing reasons, and we know for a fact that those dollars are inefficiently spent because of ridiculous zoning ordinances that all these cities have enacted, well, of course we should demand that those zoning ordinances be changed. Of course we should demand that. And to be fair, if a city says, we don't want $100 million of federal money for public housing, okay, whatever, dumb fuck. I guess, people will just slowly move out of your city and you'll die a slow, painful death like the entire continent of Europe because of NIMBYism, right? Like, I don't know. I mean, it's obviously a choice that they can make, but
hey,
this is a small step.
Don't attack the continent of Europe on this one, okay? Non-English speaking European countries produce like 3 to 4 times more housing per person than we do, okay?
It is an Anglo problem. It's the Anglos. But anyway, I was going to say, though, that
the sun's setting on the British Empire because they wouldn't build any goddamn housing. Yeah.
I was going to say that this is a small step. Hopefully, look, if we can get a favorable Supreme Court under Kamala, 5-4 liberal Supreme Court after, I don't know, Alito and Thomas are forced to resign or something, that would be based. It would allow us to enact Japanese style zoning. That's the ideal. That's the North Star. We need Japanese style zoning. This is like the American version of Japanese style zoning, where you tie federal dollars to essentially liberalization of zoning. But Japanese zoning is like directly the federal government has approval over local zoning codes. So we'll get there one day, folks.
It would be interesting to make some sort of argument that, akin to the Voting Rights Act, that you need federal review of your zoning laws because there's a history of racism there. Like, that would be the interesting extension you could make. I don't know if people are on that page yet, but
fuck that. We don't need to blame it on racism, Mike. Or not. We don't need to blame it on racism, SDL. We need to say the federal government should have approval over zoning laws because local cities can't be trusted, okay? They can't be trusted. We know better than them, SDL.
Well, see, I wish the Supreme Court would accept this, but just assuming we have to make a constitutional argument, the two arguments are either one, housing across the state borders, which is obvious. People, like something like 1 in 6 people, when they lose their job, they get a job in another state, or 2, that there's a history of discrimination and 14th Amendment crap. So, like, those are the only options that we can federalize this.
There's one other option.
Both of them are true as well. Like, they're correct. So, let's just do it, please.
There's another option, a little-known Supreme Court case, a little-known precedent that was set by the Supreme Court. Now, it was reversed because, as Brunig said, it was too hot to handle. But there was a Supreme Court case where, basically, back in the day, like Micah said, pretty much every land use restriction you can think of, you look into the history of it, and the history is just racism. It's just like we wanted to find a way to keep black people out of our neighborhood, and so we came up with HOAs, we came up with zoning ordinances, we came up with whatever land use restrictions we can think of. Now, there was a Supreme Court case, back in the day, there used to just be contracts. It used to just say, like, only white people can live here, right? And the libertarian standard of the time was, oh, it's a contract, right? I mean, if local people come together and say black people can't live here, then I don't know, that's a contract. You got to enforce it, right? And black people bought a house in a neighborhood like this, and basically, when the neighborhood found out that a black person had bought a house, they said, "Hey, well, this guy, we have a contract. It says you can't live here if you're black. I think it specifically said you can't live here if you're not white." So anybody who's not white, and so hey, federal government, or police, come in and enforce this contract, kick these black people out of this neighborhood, and these people sued, and the Supreme Court basically said, in an incredibly base decision, if you ask me, there's no such thing as private contracts, right? That, like, when you ask the state to enforce a contract, that's an impossible standard to meet if it involves discrimination. You can't just have private discrimination in your contract because you're asking the public to enforce private discrimination. So that's the most based argument that you could make to the Supreme Court. Hey, look, we can't enforce these types of contracts. They're exclusionary. They're discriminatory.
Really interesting.
Exactly,
that's
Micah.
Really, we can't enforce your zoning laws because that's exclusionary.
That's what I'm saying. That's the argument for bringing this in as a Title 14 type application or something. Like, why we can't allow any resources to be used on this because it's violating equal rights, because it's causing housing discrimination, and it's violating
economic rights. It's violating your right to just, some economic right.
The only zoning board will be in Washington, D.C., okay? The federal mono board.
The CIA will be in charge of it.
Japan has a really interesting approach to this where they create the different zoning classifications at the national level. And then I believe cities have some discretion in how they apply them. But I think that would be really cool. And you could have limits. You could say, hey, cities can only use the lowest density type of zoning for 20% of the land area of the city. Now, my preference is just get rid of almost all of them because almost all of them are bad. Parking minimums, bad. Height restrictions, bad. Setback requirements, mostly bad. Unit caps, bad.
Micah has this very bad. He's talked about this before on the show. He has this very he has this view where it's like we should just put all bad things in the Constitution and say the government's not allowed to do these things. Like our work, what is it? Our occupational license is bad. Constitutional amendment, government can't regulate this kind of thing.
That is a solution, and you can actually do it in states where you can get a ballot initiative going. I think it's great. I mean, reform the government to make it systematically better decisions, and just ban it constitutionally for making bad decisions. I don't see any cons. Now, there's one other option that we didn't engage with. If the Supreme Court had the courage to relook at their 1926 decision, Village of Euclid versus Amber Realty Company, they could just overturn the entire precedent on which the constitutionality of zoning and land use restrictions is based. And by overturning that decision, therefore, end all land use restrictions in the entire United States.
And to be clear,
Clarence Thomas,
I do think it's probably true that a lot of zoning is misused, a lot of land use restrictions are misused. I think that the argument is that they could be used progressively for these sort of pollution or these other health-based risks. And like Micah's saying, no, I think there's these market-based solutions. I think that you might be right if we had a federal centralized system where the federal government was willing to impose these limits on people and be like, you're gonna have to pay these fines if you're within this kilometer radius of a factory, or if you're within this kilometer radius and you're putting out these pollutants or whatever. But I don't think that cities have the ability to do that, and so they have to do these sort of binary things. Either we centralize it or it has to be these ad hoc solutions.
Well, I think there's a lot of solutions which are just not normal land use restrictions. I mean, you could say residential buffering ordinances. Those are a thing where, hey, you can't have this kind of activity happening within a certain, proximity.
Micah, should HOAs be abolished? Let's see how based you really are.
I don't think the state should abolish HOAs. I think we should stop subsidizing them. We subsidize private deed restrictions in the city of Houston by paying for their enforcement. I think that is silly. I think that should all be, and it's not criminal. So the
real way you can abolish HOAs, right, is by pushing full employment up even higher, right? Giving nobody time to serve on the HOA, right? Once every wine mom is employed, there will be no HOAs left.
An HOA tax. So that's that. Now, we already mentioned expanding the child tax credit. They also want to extend the Affordable Care Act tax credits, which we explained in the last video, and fix the Medicaid gap. What is the Medicaid gap, bros?
Medicaid gap is basically just that in a lot of states, especially states that didn't accept the Medicaid expansion. So for those that don't know, the Affordable Care Act, the biggest thing that the Affordable Care Act did in terms of sort of welfare-inducing, effects, let's say, was just make it to where a ton of people are now eligible for Medicaid. It used to be that to be on Medicaid, you had to be super duper poor. You had to be very, very, very poor. You had to be, I think it was literally below the federal poverty line. The federal poverty line, I think to this day, is maybe $13,000, $14,000 a year of personal family income, depending on how many children you have. You had to be super duper poor to qualify for Medicaid. What Obamacare did was, I believe it raised the eligibility for Medicaid up to 3 or 4 times the federal poverty line. So basically, instead of having to be super duper crazy poor, you could be sort of lower middle class, let's say. I think that was basically the big change that they made. And some states, they have requirements where it's not even just the poverty line. You have to be 50% of the poverty line. You have to be super crazy poor. And that's what states that didn't accept
kids and be like disabled or something.
Yeah, so states that didn't accept the Medicaid expansion, they still have these gaps of coverage. So part of what you could do to close the Medicaid gap is basically just say that states have to accept the Medicaid expansion. It's a federal program anyway. But you could also, again, like Obamacare did, you could just raise the poverty line where, instead of 1.5 the poverty line, it could be 2, 3, 4 times or whatever the poverty line. More people expanded eligible for Medicaid.
Just a quick fact check here. It isn't 2, 3, 4 times the poverty line. It's 138% of the poverty line.
That's it.
I think like in some states, which is like ridiculous, like Texas, it's like 85, 65% of the poverty line, or you have to be like disabled and have kids. And it's like, okay, so you think that some people in poverty should not get help with their health care? What the gosh dang hell? So certain states like Texas hate their populations. We refuse to take the federal money and pay to expand Medicaid for people. And so they say they're going to fix this. I have no idea how they're going to fix this. They could say the federal government's just going to force you to expand the Medicaid anyway. They're going to go take over your Medicaid program, take all the money, make their own mini Medicaid just to service the people that are in the gap area.
Oh no, federalizing Medicaid. That would be so tragic if we ran a federal program as a federal program. Oh no.
The thing that's so weird is, because people are not eligible for Medicaid, they're also below the income threshold for ACA tax credits. So there's this little area that several million people in this country are in where they don't get any Medicaid and they also don't get any subsidies for their insurance. So they just have no help whatsoever. So you're too poor to get help and you're too rich to get help. And it's like, wow, that's really strange. I wish Republicans weren't so evil.
And just to be clear, the group of people that we're talking about here are people that make like $30,000 a year. Like these are not like these are not like rich. These are not like upper middle income people that aren't qualifying for means tested programs. Like these are, like I think that the expanded child tax credit had a cutoff at $150,000 a year. It's like, okay, like at least you can make the argument that that's a super broad base, and in some true sense, people making above that amount of money are just really well off. That's not the case here, right? Like you're super poor still, even if you don't qualify for Medicaid or these subsidies as well. So it's a very inefficient system.
No, I strongly support the New Democratic Coalition's appeal to federalizing Medicaid. I just think it's really good that we're raising the portion of people on public insurance from X% of poverty to Y%. And, maybe we could just keep going that direction, right? Just keep raising it and raising it and raising it. And at some point down the line, you'd hit 100% of people. And that'd be so great. That'd be so tragic having everyone on Medicaid, Medicare. Oh, that would be so sad.
Well, obviously, the most base solution is to merge Medicaid with Medicare, to make Medicare all-inclusive so you don't have to buy tons of supplements, and to allow anybody to buy into it, including people on the individual marketplace. And they can use their subsidies to buy into it. And you can allow employers to buy into it, or better yet, ban employer-provided insurance, because F employer-provided insurance. We hate employer-provided insurance. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I did want to mention the employer buy-in portion is not present, but Minnesota has moved towards using Medicare and Medicaid as the public option.
Oh, nice.
It just this is something I keep bringing up, is that Tim Walz delayed it. It's one of the things that I hate most of. Like, if Minnesota passed this really cool public option plan, and he was like, "I'm going to delay it till 2024." Why? You could have run on that.
Wait, so is it just buying? Is it just buying into Medicaid? Because I don't see how they could buy into Medicare, but
I'm sort of conflating the two. I'm saying you would buy into the state's existing Medicaid provision services, yeah, and then you would just become that, as if it was like one of the Obamacare plans, sort of.
Okay. So. I actually really like that. Yeah, in states, if you make a new public option, some of these states have done this. They're like, wow, we have a new public option program. We're basically going to pay a random private company a lot of money just to have this shitty ass plan no one's going to take.
Yeah,
wow,
so
this is super cool.
But 5 states did that, and only Minnesota had the courage to do a real public option so far.
Yeah, just let them buy into freaking existing Medicaid, like economies of scale, losers. Anyway. Make people that are 65 and older eligible for the EITC, Earned Income Tax Credit. We discussed this last video. It is a subsidy for wages. So if you're low income, you might get a little top up from the federal government when you file your federal income taxes. It phases out pretty quickly, but right now it's really strange. People 65 and older are not eligible, presumably because we say, we're giving you Social Security, we're giving you Medicare. Why do you need anything else, Grandpa? Okay, we're already giving you enough. You're being showered with money. You don't need the EITC. This would make everybody eligible for the EITC.
And to be clear, there's two obvious reasons for this. One is that plenty of poor people do not get enough in Social Security, either because they didn't work enough during their life, because they came to the United States late, that sort of thing, or they were in a job which isn't eligible for Social Security. And two is just that even if we are giving people enough to like scrape by or whatever, why not let people who want to work, right?
It's just weird to have like policies that have random age cut. Yep. Like, oh, you're old now. Sorry, this like what? Like that's so weird.
Yeah, it's important to note as well. I was listening to a lecture on inequality and I think welfare policy or something like this, and so some people will criticize. They'll say, oh, Social Security benefits being taxed or being like part of the tax system is bad because what the heck, like, that's not even paying out that much, and why should we tax you on your benefits? But you have to keep in mind, right? So a government check and the government taking away a check is a form of a tax as well. And so when you have taxes on Social Security benefits, especially because we have things like the standard deduction and we have tax credits and we might have things like EITC expansion, it's effectively a way to means test your benefit payouts. So instead of your benefit payments, it's a way to means test your payouts. Because, for instance, if you're like a rich person with a huge 401k and huge investment accounts who also gets Social Security payments, if we tax you on that marginal dollar, then you're effectively taxed on your Social Security payments at 30-40% or whatever it is, whatever the income tax rate is. And so this EITC expansion, assuming, and I don't know if they would count Social Security like wages or Social Security payments as a part of this subsidy. So in theory, if you were part of the lower bound, like say you retired at 62, if you're now eligible for EITC because you make so little money, assuming that that's the case, again, that's just a way to expand Social Security payments and then means test them harder on the back end for people who truly don't need it as well. It's important to keep that in mind. So.
Yeah, I'm just glad that the centrist caucus of the Democrats supports expanding our little UBI, We're just making it a little bit more you.
Listen, based center-left people believing in capitalism where everyone's a winner. End the cycle of government shutdowns by changing budgeting rules. This is such a sleeper policy. Now, as some of you may know, sometimes the government shuts down. Seems like every few years, everybody on CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, they're ripping their hair out because, oh my God, we got to pass a new budget. That's because in this country, the Congress constantly has to pass new appropriations bills to have a new budget. If they don't pass a new budget, no funding, everything shuts down, bye-bye government. Now, the libertarians in our audience might think that's a good thing, but all the normal people think that's a bad thing because when the government shut down, that means it doesn't do stuff. And the government does do important stuff. It also means people don't get paid. And there's an issue where we might not be able to pay our debt. If we don't pay our debt, if we're not able to borrow more money in order to service our previous interest and debt payments, our country would default, which would send the entire economy into a global depression. I think that's bad. So they want to end this cycle by changing our budgeting rules. They're not very specific about it, but I presume it would be to make our budgets automatically renew so that if Congress doesn't pass a new budget, we just stick with the old budget and our country and the world doesn't explode.
And to be clear, this is what virtually every other country in the world, to my knowledge, does. There's only 2 countries that have a debt limit, one of which is the US and the other, I believe, is Denmark. And theirs is like 4 times higher than like the possible debt limit they could reach, whereas ours is like consistently like $10 above the amount that we have in the bank. So it's just ridiculous. Like the way every other country does it is, oh, you didn't pass a new budget this year. We're taking last year's budget, adding inflation.
Yeah, I mean, it's important to kind of keep in mind that it's also important to make them play the game, right? So the game of politics is important. For instance, if we were to imagine, let's say that baseball had a rule that said that if the game goes beyond 10 p.m. at night, then you have to negotiate what the final score was going to be. Well, what does that mean, right? Effectively, what that would mean is that, hey, if you're down in the baseball game, you might as well delay, fake an injury, do whatever you can to like get right up to that 10 p.m. line. And now you're forced to negotiate on a neutral playing field, despite what the context of the game was. And in this case, if the context of the game is, and this, I guess this is also more complicated because of things like the filibuster. If the context of the game is you have a unified government, then obviously you should probably just be forced to negotiate and try to extract concessions from the governing coalition of your party, right? Like that's obviously very, very important. And minorities within that governing coalition or minority parties in general shouldn't be able to just run out the clock on negotiations and cause potentially really disastrous effects. Like the welfare effects of these can be quite bad. When the government shuts down, federal employees have delayed checks and people aren't able to, they have to effectively work for free a lot of the times. This is where all those controversies come in. Like, oh, I work for the Coast Guard and my wife and children at home, they're not getting the payments that they're kind of owed, obviously, but I still have to work. And so now I'm away from my family, but my family also doesn't have money to pay the bills. Like, it just results in a lot of really poor outcomes. And so, yeah, just having some sort of basic assumption of, continuing the old budget, and then the debt ceiling, tying that in as well. These are two different issues, the debt ceiling and not passing a new budget. But yeah, just getting rid of the debt ceiling as well. It creates more efficiency in our government. Like we're some of the only countries, I don't know of any other country that has these kind of constructs in their political system.
Well, and just to add a small note on that efficiency point, a lot of federal agencies actually have to do budgeting around these political questions of like, is there going to be a budget? And so they start having to build up these stocks of money, like on the off chance that Republicans decide to screw the pooch this year. So they're like, well, we have like maybe 8 weeks of operating budget for all the investments we have to do and like 10 weeks for all the wage payments. And so that means that they're basically stockpiling money that they could be spending, they could be putting to use, but instead of just be operating like a normal business, they have to have this weird contingency like fund because Republicans exist. And it's like the dumbest thing ever. If you want a more efficient government, you should want rollover federal budgets. It's so silly.
Wow, based. Okay, well, we're approaching the end. They have some vague stuff here on reducing the deficit. Now, for those of you who don't know, the federal budget is something like $6.7 trillion this year. The deficit is on track to be over $2 trillion. What does that mean? Do the math really quickly, and you see that for every $10 of federal government spending, we are borrowing $3. Now, that's a lot. The more we borrow, it's like a negative social wealth fund. It imposes interest payments that we have to pay for the rest of time, which means permanently higher taxes or permanently lower spending. Now, we love spending and we hate taxes. Well, some of us love taxes. I don't like taxes. So I don't like it whenever the government has less wealth because that means it has less ability to make my life better. They have some vague stuff here on that. Nothing specific, but we all broadly agree. Reducing the deficit is important. I think it's very important. I believe my comrades on this podcast think it's somewhat important. Is that fair?
Yeah. I mean, I think we agreed. Yeah, go on.
Well, just they do sing the praises of the Inflation Reduction Act, which had deficit reduction by raising taxes. So they have a corporate minimum tax, which Micah probably hates. They have a prescription drug pricing reform, which basically raised revenue or reduced costs. And then they have more IRS tax agents beating down your door and demanding your $5, except the $5 is from a billionaire and he owes the $500 million. So yeah, those are like the big things they pointed to. I don't know what in particular they'd be suggesting to go further on, though.
You gotta keep in mind, like,
I don't think that promising any huge cuts is a good idea. It seems like that got Project 2025 in a lot of trouble. But something I do find interesting that longtime viewers, I think, will find valuable is we've had a lot of discussions on this podcast about drug pricing. And I saw a really interesting argument by a libertarian by the name of Michael F. Cannon. He works for the Cato Institute, actually arguing for federal drug price negotiation, at least for Medicare, to basically have the government bargain down the prices. Federal subsidies are jacking up the price of drugs. So to counteract what the subsidies are doing to the price of drugs, we should have the federal government impose price restrictions to bring it back down to what it would be under natural market conditions.
I mean, I feel like this is just a classic progressive argument. It's like, hey, we subsidize these things, so therefore we should have some cost controls on the back end as well. I mean, it's just a very libertarian framing, but I feel like progressives have said this as a justification for government negotiation of prices for at least a while when it comes to
that's interesting. I don't remember progressives saying anything about economics, but we can move on to the very last point. Yeah. Pursue tax policies that promote savings and development. I love savings. I love development. I don't really know what they mean, but I'm assuming they want to make it where it's easier to invest and, build more stuff. Okay. And they want to have bigger Roth IRAs and 401ks and deductions and reductions of capital gains. I mean, come on, SDL, this is your dream.
Yeah. I mean, I guess overall, looking at this entire platform, there's not enough welfare on it for me, for my tastes. I think in general, it's good to encourage things, that economic development, things like this, these are good. It's good to have paved roads and R&D spending. But I don't know. I do feel like Democrats, having another Great Society type push, right? Where, we really try to expand these welfare programs and make them more efficient. I think one of the arguments as well that's sort of undercut, it's like very open for like a centrist Democrat to be on board with it, is the idea of, hey, look, universal programs not only result in a significant administrative savings, like significantly less bureaucratic bloat, we could really systematize this much more effectively, but it also means that your sort of your marginal statutory tax rates could be much lower, right? So like instead of running the costing and saying, oh, we have to means test this on the back end with like a 50% per dollar reduction, and we have to raise the taxes on people in the top 1% by 10 percentage points or something to pay for something like a child tax credit expansion if we want it to be deficit neutral. You could just say, hey, everyone pays 5% extra in income tax or payroll tax or something like that. And then you have this distributed benefit that's universalized, right? And I think that as well, there's a political resilience, I think, to programs like that, because most people, I don't find it to be the case, even though the payroll tax is a particularly flatly applied tax. It's actually a regressively applied tax because we don't tax every dollar of earnings past a certain amount. Even though it's a particularly flat tax, it seems like people aren't constantly arguing for abolishing Social Security or stop the payroll tax or let's make it a super progressive tax, because it's a specific tax. I think, Micah, you've talked about this before. It's a specific tax, and the funds for that tax are for a specific distributed purpose, right? And I think people have behaviorally an easier time sort of justifying in their heads the payment of taxes when they know that it's for specific systems. And so if you could do the same thing for Medicare expansion, like a Medicare for all expansion, and say, hey, we're going to take that 1.2% payroll tax, we're going to increase it to 6%, but everyone's covered. You all have the option to buy Medicare if you want. That would be great. We're going to take that same thing and we're going to expand it another 1% so that everyone has access to a child tax credit or something like that. Like these are things that would be good to include, I think, even from a centrist framework. But unfortunately, that kind of thing just doesn't catch on, because it seems like even though politically that seems to be the case, Democrats are just today, the current modern day Democrats are just so deathly afraid of anything that could be considered a tax increase on the middle class. And I don't know how you get over that other than just having the political courage to get government power, enact those programs, and then dare the Republicans to repeal them. And that's a strategy that's always worked, it seems.
Or you could just lie about what the taxes do. And I mean, I think that is a strategy that has proved to be very successful in social democratic countries. They say, we're not going to raise taxes on you. We're going to raise taxes on employers. We're going to make employers contribute to pay for this beefed up in employment insurance. They don't pay enough. Now, is that a tax on you? Of course it's a tax on you. I mean, of course it is. Also, Andrew Yang, he has a great approach. He says, I'm going to give the American people a slice of every drone delivery, of every Uber ride, of every Amazon Cybertruck, whatever the hell, right? Tech stuff. What does he mean? He means a value-added tax. What does that mean? It's basically a sales tax. It's paid for by the consumer. But does it sound unpopular? No, it sounds cool and modern. It sounds awesome. So I think that might be another approach you want to consider taking.
I think so. I also wonder what it would look like just to focus on the distributional sort of side of things. Like, for instance, if you were to say, hey, like, here's the distributional effects of this tax and spend program. We're going to take a lot of money from the top. People on the bottom are going to be net significantly better off, right? Now, this is kind of a risky play because,
Don't do that.
this is a risky play, I was going to say, because people who make more than like, I don't know, say like $70,000 a year might end up being net taxpayers into certain programs. Now, they still get benefits out of them, but they might net pay into certain programs. And so that might be a little bit risky. This is sort of the Nordic model, sort of effectively speaking. But I don't know. I wonder if we really challenged people to think just a little bit harder about these things, would they? Because again, like I do recall, look, when Bernie was running for president in 16 and 20, this was a Democratic primary. It did not seem like a general audience whenever he was doing town halls, whenever he was doing public events, whenever people were polled on the issues that he brought up. It did not seem like the general audience was incredibly particularly turned off by his idea of people are going to pay more taxes, but in exchange they get more services. I've seen campaigns like this fail in places like the UK, but those are places that legitimately pay a lot of taxes already. Americans don't pay a lot of taxes, and we don't get a lot of services. So
you heard it here first, okay? You don't pay enough taxes, Americans. You think that paying what you're paying the IRS each year is a lot? Economy wants you to pay 500% more than you currently are.
But Micah, again, like okay? I don't think that.
I do think, just as a political economy thing, that's the argument for stuff like payroll taxes, where you have an item on your pay stub that says, yes, you got taxed for this, and here's what it's paying for. And like, if it's a benefit you're receiving right now rather than Social Security, then maybe it feels like you got to buy into it. That's sort of the argument that people raise.
Right. So I love dedicated taxes and tax labeling. So we have it right now for old age and disability insurance, right? It shows it on your contribution. I think there's unemployment insurance. It shows the contribution. And so you see how much money you're paying, and it's automatically taken out, so you don't have to save money for the end of the year. And it's flat, so it's really simple to administer. And I think the same thing should be done for healthcare. And I think you can make a really good argument. It's not a tax. It's a premium, babes. You are paying a 4% premium or 5% premium. Now, we also have to do an employer side contribution. This was Bernie's idea. Oh, you're only paying 5% of your income for universal healthcare. Oh my God, it's so cheap. But your employer's paying like 7.5%. So in totality, it's like 12.5%. But nobody understands how that works. Okay. Do you want social democracy? You got to make some sacrifices, people.
Well, but I just do. I don't know. I think that historically these things have been advocated for past, and they've proven to be fairly resilient, right? So, Micah, I understand on your head, and like, okay, well, if a Democrat comes out and advocates for tax increases for service expansion, that you might that might be politically disadvantageous, but I don't know. I mean, I see a history of welfare expansion and tax expansion.
That's not my claim. My claim is that you copy the European model. Now, tell me, how is health insurance funded in the country of Germany? You have split employer side and employee side contributions. It's a payroll tax, but it looks like half of it is paid by the employer. It's really all paid by you at the end of the day, but they make it look like half of it's paid by the employer. Sweden has used employer side payroll taxes very heavily in the past. If you look in the most successful social democratic welfare states in the world, they rely on VATs and often on employer side payroll taxes, which hide the tax burden from you, despite the fact that you pay it at the end of the day.
Well, I think that these aren't bad ideas in terms of political efficacy, right? But at the end of the day, right, the big problem is that Democrats are afraid to propose literally anything that could be construed as a tax increase on the corporations or the middle class or whatever. And it's like, guys, we have got to get over this.
Stop taxing the rich, okay? Tax the poor. Let's go.
It's just like
the thing that frustrates me when I look at the NDC thing is it doesn't propose new taxes. Like, it doesn't just say, hey, let's just raise the payroll tax. Let's pay for these things. Let's lower the deficit. I get it. They don't want to say that's politically unfeasible. I get it. At the same time, like, they aren't calling for new taxes on the rich. So I'm like doubly mad, right? They're not paying for social democracy through payroll taxes, and they're not getting rid of this threat, which is the ultra rich.
Liberalism. How about we just do liberalism? That doesn't sound that bad to me. But
look, I just think it's bad when Elon Musk can buy Twitter and put a bajillion Nazis on the platform. I think it's a bad thing, and I think we should have less Elon Musk Nazis.
We need a Pagovian.
I'm a moderate. Okay.
So, Micah, you believe in things like a UBI and a universal child tax credit and a Medicare buy-in. These things would require raising a lot of tax revenue, right? And so, again, you could go into a centrist Democratic caucus and say, oh, we should just propose that we do Medicare expansion through a boosted employer contribution. Instead of a 1.2% split on Medicare, we're going to do 1.2%, 6% split, but the employer pays it. And you know what they're going to tell you? They're going to say, oh, but they're just going to say that we're killing jobs and we're killing employers and we can't do this. And oh my God, we're just so scared to raise any amount of taxes. Like, guys, Jesus, like, fucking grow some fucking balls and just propose something that'll help American people. Like, Jesus, how hard is this?
Here's my plan. Okay. And I agree. Right. I agree. Some folks on my team are not fully woke on this. Okay. A lot of folks on y'all's team are not woke on many issues like permitting reform. Okay. Everybody makes mistakes sometimes.
Oh my God. But when you're saying, I'm sorry, I just have to, you rolled out the slick voice so well. Please go ahead.
My plan is to merge everybody into the Medicare system, Medicare Advantage. Okay, you can buy in. Everybody can buy in. We end all the subsidies for other kinds of insurance, and then we slowly raise employer-side contributions to pay for your insurance, and we subsidize it on the back end. People don't see it. Premiums slowly go down. Democrats get all the credit, and the employer-side contribution increase is so small and so slow that people don't even realize that it's happening because their wages are not going down. They're just going up slightly slower than they would have recognized. Completely slick, completely smart. Eventually, we have universal healthcare fully financed by the taxpayers, and Democrats win 79% of the vote in every single election.
We'll see. We'll see what ends up happening. I feel like for the next at least 10 years, the Democrats are just going to be afraid of literally anything that's construed as a tax increase. I mean, we'll see, I guess. But that's the new Democratic Coalition's platform. Again, hopefully these are just some ideas in general. Keep in mind, the new Democratic Coalition, the Progressive Coalition, these are kind of the two big, pieces of the Democratic puzzle. And so, this is like Optimus Prime in every Transformers movie. He combines with another Transformer to make himself even more powerful. We just take the good progressive platform bits, the good new Democratic Coalition platform bits, put them together, and boom, we get something greater than the sum of its parts, hopefully, if we get a Democratic trifecta. But look, I remember I tweeted about this the other day. Absolute peak political discourse was 2021, when we had a united Democratic government and we were all talking about the best way to do welfare reform. That was peak political discourse. Absolute peak. This was also before inflation had really come on board and that took over everything. Peak political discourse. I want that political discourse back. Okay, we can at least have these debates. Oh, what's the best way to do this reform or that reform? And we're not talking about a fascist takeover of the country all the time. And the Republicans won't let us do everything. That is not peak political discourse. Micah, any final thoughts?
I would just like to say that I'm going to give some credit to the progressives here. The progressives love to blow shit up. Sometimes they blow up good shit. Sometimes they blow up bad shit. But they want big change, and they love taxes. And they love spending stuff. And that's great when we need to spend more. And that's terrible when we need to spend less. But here's what I give credit to my centrist buddies on, okay? The pragmatic stuff, the sleeper policies, okay? Your occupational licensing reforms, the solving the housing crisis, they're bringing down the deficit. The kind of stuff that can pass whenever Congress is gridlocked 75% of the time, the kind of stuff which is arguably most important for the long-term utility of the world, that's the stuff that they focus on. Okay? And they consistently hit the bullseye. Yeah, Progressive Caucus, they get some extra spending and subsidies here. They give you 9 times as many stupid subsidies and stupid taxes over here. And they don't even vote for your permitting reforms. They don't vote for your permitting reforms. They don't vote for your border bills. They don't vote for your liberalizations. They're a fan of all this different types of trade restrictions.
I believe AOC co-sponsored a permitting reform bill, Micah.
AOC is the one exception y'all have.
She's like the head of the whole progressive movement, basically.
She's gotten canceled by the progressive movement, I think, every single week, ever since she came out against sunscreen. She came out for sunscreen deregulation because she understands that we make some good points in the liberal camp.
So listen, AOC is our avatar. She will bring us together. She will be the perfect 2036 presidential candidate. She will be the next FDR. FDR more like AOC, I say. Anyway, SDL, final words on this before we go to our audience topic.
Well, I actually was going to comment on this. So the Progressive Caucus also put out a shorter executive summary of their progressive agenda, which I think I linked in the same document. And it's actually remarkable how much overlap there is between them. The progressives usually want more spending on XYZ. They want more protective benefits. They want higher taxes, but many of the things are the exact same. So the new Democratic Coalition, they want Medicare to negotiate drugs. The Progressive Coalition wants them to negotiate drugs, just with a broader remit. The NDC, they wanted insulin capped at 35. The progressives simply say, let's do that, but more. And so it's always just striking to see that nowadays there's actually more policy similarity. I was going down this list, and I think of the progressives, I would maybe only dislike like 1 or 2, and the same thing for the NDC, only dislike maybe 1 or 2 on that list. It seems like there's pretty broad agreement on we need to shift towards social democracy. The disagreement is simply how much and how fast. So
I don't know.
Have you read the progressive document, Mike?
I've read the progressive document. I'm looking at it right now. I don't see any of the supply side pro market changes that the NDC pushes for. I see some slight spending overlap, but I see tons of other extra spending. Let's take one example. Expand Social Security. You know, when I look at the American welfare system, I see one that is heavily skewed towards elderly people. I see a system which is scheduled to have a 25% shortfall by the middle of the next decade, and something that is, even if we eliminated the cap on Social Security contributions, would still have solvency issues. But their idea is that we should actually expand it and give more benefits to millionaires and billionaires so that they can get bigger Social Security checks. I don't know, guys.
There's a lot of supply side stuff.
Hold on. To read the actual proposal. Sorry, go ahead.
There's a lot of supply side stuff on this. Micah his brain shuts off whenever progressives propose something. Okay, number one, all the union stuff. The supply of labor.
It's not supply side. Come on.
There's a supply of labor, you fuck. Okay, hold on, STL. That's not the only thing. There's a ton of supply. There's a supply of labor and a demand for labor. There's a supply of labor. They address that. There's a ton of supply stuff on the medical side. They talk about price negotiations. They talk about manufacturing different drugs. That's supply side reforms.
NDC wants, right? The NDC wants the same thing. So it just seems like we're all in agreement here. We're one big happy tent. And notice how Micah's
brain shuts off when new Democrats price controls, hello, and then it's progressive price controls. HR, hello, please.
What supply side means? You did an entire master's in economics and you still don't know our basic lingo, folks. Because
supply of labor. That's a thing.
Like, look. Deadweight loss goes down under NDC. Deadweight loss goes up over from the Progressive Caucus. You can't name a single policy that's in here that is actually a supply side expansion, except for maybe throwing government money at random ass industries. Sorry, folks.
I just wanted to, on the Social Security thing, I just wanted to read. It's a short document. It's not quite as long as the NDC's one. It just says increase and expand benefits by closing tax loopholes so millionaires and billionaires pay what they owe. The specific thing they're trying to get at is removing the cap to Social Security so that over, I think it's like $150,000, give or take, that everyone will pay into Social Security. That seems basically fine. That's making it a more redistributive tax.
Here's the problem. We all agree with that. We made a Social Security video. They want to use some of the money to expand benefits. Presumably, they're just going to keep the existing funding formula, which means that millionaires and billionaires actually get higher Social Security checks than they do already. Why do I think that? Because that's what Bernie Sanders' proposal was. That's what his actual proposal was. That's a stupid proposal. Millionaires and billionaires, F y'all, okay? You're going to get zero extra. We're going to cut your Social Security benefits, and we're going to increase Social Security benefits for low-income people. That's not means testing. That's less regressive. We have reverse means testing for Social Security. The more you earn, the more you get. The less you earn, the less you get. You earn $0 throughout your life, you're super poor. Yeah. What do you get? Zero. That's stupid, in my opinion.
Listen, there's a lot of, Micah, it's bizarre that you're saying these things aren't supply side reforms. Obviously, when you improve the labor side of the economy, that's a supply side reform. When you negotiate drug prices, when you manufacture publicly drugs to expand the supply of them, when you invest money in public housing developments, these are supply side reforms.
Wait. Those last two are supply side. Price controls is not a supply side expansion, but the negotiation is fine.
Very well could be.
Unions increasing making where many more workers are unionized is not going to increase the supply of labor. If anything, it increases wages.
Price controls very literally increase supply when you have monopolistic competition. Maybe read your Econ 101 book, Micah, for once in your life, all right? You can't just skip Econ 101 class and come to this podcast, all right?
I guess just more broadly, there is the argument that raising wages will tend to get more people into the labor force. Like it does reduce evidence.
Zero evidence that unions increase labor force participation.
If they raise wages,
that minimum wages increase employment. Zero evidence.
I mean, the causal link seems pretty clear. Like one, unions tend to be the wage setters in their industry. That tends to raise wages across the industry. There's pretty strong evidence for that. And then two, if you do that, more people enter the workforce because higher wages means higher.
According to Micah, there is no supply of labor. There's only demand. Only demand. Yeah,
because when you disequilibrate supply and demand, you can have a shortage of jobs. And this is what happens. Now, the claim that you're making is there is monopsony in the marketplace, which leads to wages being set too low. So we actually have an insufficient supply of workers. And if we use union bargaining power to bargain up wages, then we get the real equilibrium, which has more supply. The issue is we did research on that. And almost always that's not the case. Most of the time, whenever you see minimum wages have small employment effects, they're small negative employment effects or they're negligent effects.
No, so that's one thing. Go ahead.
That's true. It's true. Because of the monopoly claim, it was correct. You would see a significant increase in the binding minimum wage would lead to a significant increase in employment. Doesn't happen.
That is what we see when you break out markets by their level of monopsony. We see disemployment in low monopsony, which is what you'd expect if you're pushing wages above what people are worth at their marginal value. But we see nil effects in medium monopsony and actually positive effects on employment in high monopsony areas, which is exactly what you'd expect under the monopsony theory. I can link you that one. I think it's Dubé 2019. And it finds exactly this, that there is a monopsony effect, that people are being paid too little. And yes, I do agree there's a limit. You can only raise it so much, and then you're going to hit an upper bound. But I don't think we're at it. I think
and unionization
studies show this about 9% below, right?
And
so just raise wages about 9%.
And unionization, which the progressives are pushing, is a fitted solution to monopsony power. You address the high monopsony places, the low monopsony places take care of themselves, Micah.
And there's an argument that if we shift towards sectoral bargaining, you can actually drive down the wages of high income workers. Like if you want to really go down the Meidner plan,
supporting labor distribution by like artificial wage compression, that sounds so efficient.
It is efficient. That's the explicit argument.
To labor market inefficiencies is 5,000 more longshore union workers so that we can block automation in every sector of the economy. That sounds like a really great idea. How about we just have every company banning automation in every union contract?
Well, I mean, one of the things that we've seen is that as unions have shifted in their leadership towards wanting to expand rather than a castle of protecting the people that currently have jobs, like we saw in the California building. We saw this as the Democratic Party in California became more and more YIMBY. The unions there around housing construction became more and more interested with growing the unions rather than trying to protect people who currently had jobs. And so they became less and less about these restrictions on you have to follow these and that rules because those rules are what give us the jobs, and more about, oh, if you're building a ton of housing, there's going to be a bunch of people to employ. So
it's really interesting that we look at California, a fantastic example where unions have definitely not rent seeked at all and have absolutely been a lobbyist for just uniformly across the board.
Let me put it like this, Michael. Why do you think it is that unions in Europe, which are stronger, have not resisted these automations of the shores, right? These automations of the ports. The reason probably comes down to
even in Scandinavian countries, you have seen strikes that have resisted automation. I mean, it's just a true thing.
But less per capita is the point that I'm trying to raise. And so the oddity here is that although unions are stronger and larger and cover more of the economy, there's less incentive to do so, arguably, because they have all these additional benefits which help people who are disemployed, and because there's union work elsewhere. So you don't lose as much by losing, say, one union job because you enter another union job. So if you lower the wage differentials, then suddenly not such a big deal.
We've got to end this segment. Here's all I'll say. Okay, here's all I'll say, guys. This is peak political discourse. Okay, a bunch of people left of center arguing about how and why and the circumstances by which we can move this country to the left. We can't do that if Republicans control Congress, okay? So if you live in Montana, you need to get your ass out of your house and go support John Tester for U.S. Senate. Okay, we all agree with that. All right.
Did you see that Trump clip where he's like, tell Joey to get his fat ass off the couch and go vote for Trump? Like, what a freaking crazy thing to say about your voters.
Yeah,
so true.
Well, anyway, let's go to the next segment after this. Give me 1 second, guys. I'll be right back. Entertain the stream until we go to the next segment.
Yeah, so Micah, you
were complaining about reducing the wages of high-income workers, but there's a benefit to that in that it rewards high-productivity firms. And since you're all about rewarding investment and rewarding innovation, I just don't understand why you want them to pay such high labor costs, right? I just think the workers should be paid less. Isn't that what you're all about, Micah?
I understand the gish galloping is the natural leftist strategy, but let's return to the point that you brought up previously, where you mentioned, oh my God, look at some of these countries. They have higher unionization rates and they have less resistance of automation. Excuse me, which countries? Let's talk about it specifically. Certain countries have less unionization than we do, like France, and they also have a lot of like certain countries like Spain, Portugal, they have a lot of resistance to automation. Now, you want to talk about Scandinavia only because it's the only place where your ideology hasn't resulted in
everything just works. Wow, that's crazy. We should just do whatever they do.
Wait. So look, yeah, you want to do what Denmark does and have flex security where they say, hey, you're not even freaking allowed. We're gonna make government policy stopping you from blocking automation in your contracts. Can we do that here?
That seems no. To be clear, I would, if you gave me 80% unionization for the flex security, I would take it overnight. That seems like an easy bargain, right? It's better in every way than the current policy, and it would give workers higher wages. So what's so wrong with it, Michael?
Wait a minute. I don't see that anywhere. Flex security, anything to prevent unions from blocking.
Well, I also don't see any of that in the New Democratic Coalition. That's crazy. I don't see them arguing for anti-automation stuff in union contracts either. In fact, I don't even see things about, say, sectoral bargaining.
The hell out of the existing bad unions, and one of them is not. Wow.
Oh,
dude,
my God.
Crazy.
You want to know the only state in the country that's moved towards sectoral bargaining? California. It's California. That's right, brother.
Terrible. Yeah. Oh, wait, what's that?
You can't say that it's terrible. It's been there for 1 year. We don't even know what it's been
and
like.
It already managed to be terrible. Wait, what was the exclusion? If you sell bread or something, you're excluded. That's really strange. From the fast food workers wage board, $20 special minimum wage of $20. That's so weird. Wow, California, really the best place for your labor market, where systematically their unemployment rate is significantly elevated over the average of the country. Wow, that's really interesting. That's really strange.
Well, I mean, you got to keep in mind the people in charge of California are people like Newsom, who, I mean, certainly probably falls more liberal centrist in the Democratic Party than far left progressive, right? I mean,
yeah, we shouldn't let an NDC or lead a social democracy.
By the way, it was a conservative Democrat, Kathy Hochul, who got rid of congestion pricing, Micah.
Listen,
so maybe look in your own backyard before you look into our backyard. Micah.
It's just really weird to me that
I'm just a big fan of Alex Lee. I'm not such a big fan of these centrists like Kathy Hochul, right? I just think we should be building more housing. Unlike that Kathy. Oh, that Kathy.
I just think it's really interesting that all like the leftist run like cities, leftist run states, with socialists like the New York City Council are just like so bad. It's so crazy that like all their ideas are really bad. It's really weird.
Leftists don't run. Eric Adams was like the most centrist guy.
Democrats are like super based.
In the mayor of New York's election, the top 3 candidates were both moderate Democrats. You had Yang, the trash lady. No. You had Yang, the trash lady, and then you had Eric Adams. I think Eric Adams and the
number 2.
No. The trash lady was number 2. She made it to the final runoff. Okay, look it up, Micah. No, I want you to fact check it right now. No, look it up. Look it up. Look it up.
The Condor State winner. Excuse me. The Condor State winner. Okay, the ranked choice voting messed this up. Y'all are a fan of the ranked choice voting system. I'm sorry, it produced an undemocratic outcome. But if you look at
but Micah, who was number 2 in the election? You seem to be avoiding that question for some reason.
Was the most preferred candidate in the election. I'm sorry that y'all don't want to recognize that your progressive goddess was the one who was supposed to win.
Wait,
and your voting system messed it up.
You think Maya Wiley was the first ranked candidate?
She was the Condorcet winner, Baba. The Condorcet winner.
What does that mean?
Guys, look this up. Jesus.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Condorcet winner is the winner that would win head-to-head against any specific candidate. The ranked choice voting system is structurally deficient, so it led to the Condorcet winner not actually winning the election.
Wasn't that just an issue? There were too many candidates. Am I just misremembering this?
It's the elimination order. So Maya Wiley got eliminated too early, but head-to-head.
Yeah, but isn't that less of a concern if you were like it was the issue just that different candidates got eliminated the wrong order because there were like 6 or 7 or something, or did they run off? I forget.
The more candidates you have, I guess the worse the distortion can be. But even with 3 candidates, you can have this bad elimination order. We've talked about this in our ranked choice voting.
This isn't even true. I'm looking at the polling. The Condorcet winner who would win against every individual matchup was Eric Adams and Andrew Yang. Those were the 2 candidates who did the best head-to-head polls.
It's just not true. But I'm going to link you a study right now.
I'm looking at the polls right now. The polls don't agree with you.
I'm sorry. Are polls votes? Wait. Is Donald Trump president right now?
Well, wait.
I don't remember that.
Are you talking about comparing the ranks on the ballots and just seeing like who has the average lowest ranking or something? I'm not sure what methodology you're going with here. But
I'm gonna show you.
Okay. So pulling back from the distortions that may occur under ranked choice voting, I think that many of the places that I think it's easy to characterize the places we dislike as run by the opposite of what we'd like. So it's easy to be like Kathy Hochul. She's a centrist. She's doing bad stuff. And then just like blame it all on her. It's also easy to be like New York. It's run by the socialists, and that's why it's terrible. But most of these places are mixtures. Like they're not so cleanly divided.
I mean, obviously, progressives in the progressive movement sometimes will do, stupid NIMBY stuff. But then obviously you have a lot. I mean, look, like your left NIMBYs are mostly like your suburban center left, people who basically don't want black people to live in their neighborhoods, right? So I mean, I don't know. Obviously, there's a lot of bad apples on each side of certain issues, but I think it's just I don't know. Yeah, I think it's just kind of ridiculous to say like, oh, like the progressive ideology leads to bad things, but my center-left liberalism doesn't lead to bad things. Like, again, it's center-left liberals that created all these NIMBY policies all over the fucking place in all these major cities. Right?
That's really interesting, because last time I checked, when I was at YIMBY Town in Austin, which y'all weren't at because I'm the center-left one. I was at YIMBY Town, y'all weren't. There was leftists that were protesting the YIMBYs for not being progressive enough. And last time I checked, also there is a laundromat owner in San Francisco which was blocked from building housing by leftist organizers for about 3 months. And also last time I checked, in the state of Texas, Texas Housers, the biggest left-wing housing advocacy organization in the state of Texas, released a 40-page long paper about why deregulating housing and deregulating zoning, even though they're racist, doesn't actually help with the housing crisis. And so they're actually the biggest issue that I'm dealing with right now, trying to get Democrats to vote for YIMBY stuff.
I'm happy to concede that YIMBYs being protested by leftists is way more common than leftists being protested by YIMBYs. But the reason for that is that center leftists don't protest like anything on the regular. So like the problem is I can't point you to like here's some like left NIMBYs being protested by center left YIMBYs, because they don't do that for anything. Like it just that never happens.
Wholly based.
So it's just I don't know. What you're basically telling me is that the only people who ever like to put up picket lines and say things are like leftists, and so all the good things and all the bad things that happen on those picket lines, the only ones that ever have it are the lefties.
I mean, okay, here's the truth. Okay, if we're going to be serious and we're going to be fair, and I'm not going to be shill. Okay, there's center left, center-ish, do nothing corporate Democrats. We don't like them. Okay, they're bought by special interest groups. They don't want to change anything. They're political creatures. Bad. I don't know any, but I don't like them. Okay. Then there's inspired based pro-growth liberal Democrats. This guy. Okay. Those are the guys I like. Okay. And the women and the non-binary folks. And then there's leftists. They're inspired. Okay. They have.
Oh no, his mic was tragically cut off.
Big Let took off his microphone.
Well, look, guys, let's move on to our audience topic anyway. Who cares about this ridiculous nonsense? We're all going to be voting for Democrats anyway, okay? And if Micah lived in Minneapolis, he'd be voting for Ilhan Omar in the general election. And if I lived in friggin' West Virginia, I'd be voting for Joe Manchin, okay? We're all Democrats here, all right? Now, anyway, let's move on to our audience topic of the week. Guys, our audience topic of the week was pretty interesting, okay? It was a suggestion from our Discord. We put it in the audience poll. Patreon's voted for it. Patreon.com/the3wonks. If you want to say and what we talk about on a week-to-week basis. The topic this week that received the most votes: should the central bank use UBI as a tool for inflation? I don't want to say that this is a growing idea because we don't really see any serious person really suggesting this, but this is something that I've heard brought up, kind of again and again. And I've talked to Alex Howlett, who's a consumer monetary theory guy, and he kind of subscribes to this idea. Maybe there's some weird nuances that I'm missing here, but essentially, look, we have a lot of criticisms for the Fed using interest rates as a tool to fight inflation. Hey, look, why are we trying to collapse the housing market as a way to fight inflation? That doesn't seem like a very fitted solution. Hey, why are we printing a bunch of money and effectively giving it to investors and things like that in the form of quantitative easing? That doesn't seem like a great way to trickle up inflation, and it certainly doesn't seem like it's very welfare-inducing or, let's say equality maximizing at the very least. There must be a better way. So people will say, hey, we should have better fiscal policy. We should have things like automatic stabilizers for investment and infrastructure and direct checks and things like that. But why don't we just skip a step, fellas? That's the question here. Why don't we just say, hey, look, every American has a federal deposit account that the Fed manages. We've agreed that that's based in the past before. And the Federal Reserve can directly just throw you a little money every now and then if they want to increase inflation. Or should we go even further and say, hey, why not just do UBI, but the Federal Reserve just cuts the checks for UBI? Okay, what are the advantages and disadvantages of this idea? I guess let's start with SDL. What do you think about this? How expansive does your view in this go?
I mean, the obvious one is that if you're willing to say not just the Federal Reserve be able to raise payments, but also to lower payments, which people would despise, then you have a very direct finger on inflation insofar as you're affecting people's propensity to consume. And insofar as we think aggregate demand is like the real determiner, and with also respect to capacity and stuff of inflation. So if you think you're over capacity and inflation is rising as a result, well, simply lower people's amount of money and they won't spend as much and you'll go below capacity and inflation will stop.
Yeah,
you are making people poorer to do so, which the same thing is like a recession, but you're doing so directly, maybe with less lag and less like weird distortionary effects on other markets. That's the argument.
Yeah, I think that's the impossible part of this proposal is the idea. It's like, hey, if it's going to control inflation, like inflation specifically, you'd have to be able to take money out of people's bank accounts, which the government is
and presumably, just to be clear, the alternative is not take money out of bank accounts, but you're getting a monthly check and you just deduct like the inflation.
Right.
Whatever.
That's never going to happen, right? So there's a 0% chance that the government would ever do something like that. But I will say that deflation is probably worse than moderate levels of inflation. At least that's the agreed upon stance from central bankers across the world. And so insofar as like if you have a country like Japan, right? Japan did like quantitative easing on steroids, and it took basically a global supply chain crisis to get them to have any level of inflation. Japan, just put money in people's bank accounts, okay? Print the money, throw everyone $300 equivalent yen, and then that'll probably produce inflation better than, just doing in a steroid level of quantitative easing. Like you can basically give people payments, but taking it away sounds politically extremely infeasible. But there's institutional frameworks that we'll talk about later. Michael, what are your initial thoughts on this?
So, yeah, I think the economic arguments for this is really strong. As you mentioned, interest rate reductions are like super imperfect because they hit certain industries more than others, right? And so usually you're trying to raise demand everywhere. It takes a long time for raising demand in one sector to kind of hit all the other sectors, and it's super slow. It also just takes a long time for interest rate cuts to hit anybody because you have to get people to actually go get the loans and spend the money. And when you hit like the zero lower bound where your interest rates are zero or really low, there's just a lower propensity to borrow. And this is what Japan saw. This is what Europe's seen, where they make interest rates negative. Like they just throw all of this resources and energy towards trying to lower the cost of capital. And it just turns out it doesn't lead to that much more demand because there's only so much you can do. So there's a real use here for having a direct mechanism to increase demand in a way that is non-distortionary in any sense. And a UBI is the most fitting way to do so. So I think that there's some inclusion this could have. You could have a moderate version of this idea where whenever interest rates hit zero, that is when if the central bank wants to do more stimulus, they can send a check to everybody. So it's just like if you reach a problem, break glass, you have this mechanism to escape recessions. You could also have a policy where if you're fully managing demand with UBI payments, to increase it, but if you want to decrease it, you can have some sort of tax mechanism on the back end. No tax mechanism. The problem is deducting from basic income payments is, like as Joel said, really politically unpopular. But you could have some hidden tax like a VAT they're able to mess with on the back end to raise revenue. The problem is this is just like a constant ratcheting up game because the UBI will only go up over time and the tax, I suppose the tax could actually go down over time. So
well, I think that from my perspective, at least, so to strictly answer the question, I don't know that the Federal Reserve should be in the business of regularly sending out payments. Like every month you get some amount of money from the Federal Reserve. But I think that one-time checks is just an obvious, yes, you should do that. Like if we have a scenario, like you said, Micah, where interest rates are zero, quantitative easing just has an extremely mixed record. I can't really tell if quantitative easing is actually good at all. And we don't have the inflation that we want. We're still hovering around 0%, or we have deflationary, we're in a recession or something, for instance. Like the idea that the Fed could just say, hey, everyone, there's $1,000 in your Fed checking account. Go ahead and transfer that to your banking account or just spend it directly on your Fed issued, depository card or whatever the fuck. Like,
that's right, giving everyone a national ID card, but it's just a credit card.
Right. Well, I think that makes a lot more sense, right? And it does avoid, I think, some of these, like, it's like only ever a positive thing, basically, that the government could do. Now, I think that the strongest argument against this, it's not a good argument, but this is what a lot of conservatives are going to say. Guys, what are you thinking? Giving the government the power to just print money and hand it out to people? What if a stupid progressive like Micah says gets in charge and says, we're just going to give everyone $5,000. Fuck it. I don't give a shit. Okay. What if some weird populist like Trump gets in and says, I don't care. I'm going to fire everybody unless they give everybody $2,000 because I'm running for re-election. Okay. What do we think about this? Is this a serious concern?
I mean, it's a serious concern insofar as all abilities to give people money are a serious concern. The US doesn't mostly seem to have a lot of obvious examples where like suddenly it goes up before the election, suddenly it disappears, because a lot of these things tend to be in law. We have a fairly strong independent civil service. And like if you have someone like Trump who's willing to fire everyone anyway, then and there's no checks on it from Congress, like you might just be screwed no matter what your institutional setup is. Like you can only have so many levels of independence before some guy who just decides to break all your norms and a party in Congress that wants to support him doing that can just do that. Like, I think there's just a limit on that. I do think that you should probably try and make it as independent as possible. So it's nice actually to suggest something like the Fed, where it's at least got like 2 or 3 layers of independence. It's harder to hire and fire. It's like way outside the norms. Even Republicans don't like the idea of randomly hiring, firing those people. But it's not impossible to imagine a Republican Party which would be on board with that. And then I think you're just screwed. So I don't think there's any way around that.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a challenge. Already there is a political pressure by people like Trump, specifically Trump, actually, to lower interest rates. He told Jerome Powell, whenever he was president, hey, you need to lower interest rates. And he said, even now, whenever I get in office, I'm going to make them lower interest rates because they're not lowering it enough. So, political independence is always fraught. And you could say, well, when it involves direct checks, potentially it's even worse. But I'd just say, well, to fire the Fed chair, you need Congress. Why don't you just get Congress to borrow a bunch of money and send everybody a check? I mean, like, if you don't care about the long-term consequences, that seems frankly easier. And that would have less of an effect on inflation because, yeah, giving people money is popular, but inflation's really unpopular. Borrowing tons of money and blowing up the deficit actually has long-term negative consequences, but in the short term, it might not increase inflation nearly as much. So I'd say that they already have a really bad option on the table. I'm not really sure if this would introduce a less bad option to what they probably already could do.
Yeah, I think I think it does depend on your institutional framework, like from the outset. Like, for instance, if I lived in Argentina, I probably would very strongly not recommend this policy because it's just not clear to me that they have the types of norms and political institutions that would responsibly handle such a policy. But if I lived in, say, like South Korea or Japan or in America, where it's like, hey, it seems like we have a strong tradition at this point of political independence of the central bank, and that the central bank is a fairly technocratic body that is broadly agreed upon to be a nonpartisan in nature, then I think that it would make a lot more sense. And as well, you can always fall back on Micah's argument. It's like, are we fundamentally just criticizing democracy? Because, look, you can always just have a legislative body pass a budget that includes giving people a lot of direct checks, and guess what? The Treasury could just print the president, or the Congress and authority of the president could always just print money like that and directly give it to people. There's nothing necessarily stopping our democratic frameworks from doing that currently. It's just a matter of, is it actually more responsibly managed in the context that we're talking about by the Federal Reserve in conjunction with Congress, or just Congress by itself? So we wouldn't recommend getting rid of the ability of Congress to just give people direct checks if they want. The direct checks during COVID seemed to help a lot. But it's just, hey, could the Fed do this quicker? Could we also establish a secondary sort of spillover positive institution of Federal Reserve banking? We all agree that we should have some sort of central federal banking system where you actually allow people to have depositor accounts with a reserve. Some people say postal banking is the right way to do this. I think Micah prefers...
Just as a small note, the Congressional Progressive Caucus agenda explicitly includes postal banking, just while we were on that.
It does include postal banking.
I think it's cringe.
I think Micah prefers like basically Federal Reserve banking and things like that. But all that's to say is that this kind of institutional framework would allow us to build another institution, which we think is positive, which is a universal public sort of banking depository option as well, which is pretty good.
And I guess the thing I would just add to this is that a lot of these are fairly, like a lot of things that we propose on this podcast are fairly big spending programs. And it's probably good to try and set up institutional frameworks where they're fairly independent of the whims of politics day to day, like just in general. You don't want the Social Security Administrator to suddenly jack up payments or jack down payments to like win an election for a guy. You want that to be fairly independent, but that's just a problem for all things that the state does. And so insofar as you think that's a solvable problem, then it seems fine. And if you don't think it's a solvable problem, then you're probably like a libertarian. So,
or maybe you're nuanced in your Micah and you realize that some problems are not solvable or some problems are systematic and there's pros and cons, you're just a nuanced guy.
The thing I would just add here is I think you could probably argue there's certain institutional setups you could have for the Federal Reserve, which could be even more independent. Like right now, the president has a high degree of control, but there's also all these like reserve banks. It's a fairly complicated and fairly technocratic system, which seems to be good. Like you might be able to increase that more. I haven't looked too deeply into it, but I would imagine that if you also added like giving Congress the ability to appoint people on like very long timeframes, like say 15 years, it's the same sort of argument we have for the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is obviously politicized. But if you at least have very long terms, it's hopefully less politicized as Congress. That's the argument anyway. So insofar as you think you can do those sorts of things, you should probably want to replicate those frameworks in general.
There's tons of ways to make it more independent. Like you could even have like your different branches, which have boards, like appoint the higher level board members and have to have the board approve whoever the chairperson is. I mean, there's like a lot of stuff you could do. So frankly, I think that there's some sort of interpretation of this idea which could have value. Now, what people need to understand is recessions, trying to avoid recessions, proper demand management and monetary policy is probably one of the most important things for long-term economic growth. We talk about free trade and liberalizations here and there, but like you look at the Great Recession and that set back the global economy tremendously. And that happened because aggregate demand was not high enough. So because of the systemic fragility of the financial system, the supply of money and credit collapsed, which led to huge amounts of unemployment. So if we can find a way to make the central bank work better, even a little bit better, and avoid one recession or make it a little bit slower, that has tremendous consequences for people's well-being. And I'd introduce one idea. Even if you think direct checks are a bad idea, the central bank could still do central bank financed VAT cuts or payroll tax cuts on the employer side or something like that, to provide it a little bit more punch whenever demand is falling dramatically.
I do think it's an interesting suggestion just to throw all of them at the wall, to have VAT cuts, payroll cuts, and direct payments as all tools where the central bank has, say, like a 3% difference in like how much it can adjust up and down the taxes, and maybe like a 30% difference in how much it can adjust up and down the payments. Like you could potentially have an extremely high degree of control over the taxes that people face in the store and the taxes that they face on their income and the amount of income they're getting like on any given month. Like whether that's good or bad is hard to know. Like you'd hope you have a really good economic management model if you're having that much control. But if you could do that and like abolish recessions, the economic gains of that would be unbelievably large once you increment them over like 100 years. Yeah. Right.
And we can imagine with the rise of AI, you could make a central bank that's run by AI. Actually, I think that would solve a lot of these issues. Well, a lot of people in the monetary policy community support rules-based monetary policy because they point to where discretion of the central bank has been misused. Every so often we have a central bank which thinks it's getting really clever. They're like, this is what we usually would do, but this context is different. And almost every single time that happens, they get it wrong. Just like the interest rate hikes, which happened right before the Great Recession, are often seen post hoc as probably inappropriate for the economic context. Some people blame them for starting the entire recession. Of course, there's multiple factors at play, but
okay. One, I just hate using the word AI there. I agree that you could have machine learning set rules-based policy and then some additional discretion on top of that seems like the appropriate way to try and balance it. But I mean, like a rules-based approach is also an additional way to add one layer of yet more of political independence of like, here's an economic model. We're going to follow it come hell or high water, but we're going to have like 10% discretion on top of that in case we really screwed up our model.
Right. So if the Federal Reserve Board says we don't actually want the rules-based judgment, if like 75% of them say that, they can suspend it and make another decision. And that just prevents the likelihood that like these really edge case, like politically motivated central bank policies ever occur.
I think that, yeah, I think some of that makes sense.
Actually, that's just one last thing. I think the suggestion of like the 75% rule is very interesting in the context of, say, having like if you have Congress appoint not just say one person at a time, but a panel of like 5 people. If you have to get 75% approval, you basically need cross political support for something, which is very unlikely to have a partisan benefit for one party at the expense of other. Instead, it's going to be like maybe, I don't know, 3 parties at the expense of the other. Like we've established proportional representation and everyone's beating up on the fascist party or something. That's possible, just unlikely. You know, it's way less likely than as if it's like just 50%.
Yeah, I think that overall I'm a little bit skeptical of the idea of lowering taxes, just because, again, I think politically speaking, you know, the advantage, I think ironically, just printing money and giving it to people is a little bit more politically feasible because there's no like debt associated with it. I think you could run into weird political problems where if like the Federal Reserve says, hey, we're going to do like a broad-based tax cut, well, all of a sudden you're giving room for politicians to be like, this is bad because it raises the deficit, and oh my goodness, like, why do we give these people the ability to put our children into debt in the future? My goodness.
Well, but it wouldn't do that though, right? Because the entire point is that the Federal Reserve would be buying down the tax rate. So we'd say, hey, this is how much, you know, cutting the corporate tax rate by 4% would cost you. We will give you that money, lower the tax rate, right? And it would just like, it will do that. So the federal government's money is held constant.
So you're saying instead of just cutting taxes, the Federal Reserve would order a tax cut and then print the money and just give it to the federal government directly?
Yeah, it's like monetary finance, because we're looking at 2 different ways of this working, right? So the entire idea of direct payments is the central bank creates money and it sends it out to people. So this is saying, okay, well, maybe we don't want to do that because of some political reasons. Yeah. What if we just create money, we throw it at the government and force them to lower their tax rates? And so people end up having more money at the end of the day, right? It's like a little bit less direct.
Yeah, I think as well
and my suggestion is we should do all 3 of them at once and then do some sort of really neat causal analysis to see what work, okay?
Well, one thing I was going to say was that the advantage of this as well is that the ramping of payments is so much more politically feasible, right? So I think that one of the things that people, I think, rightly get a little bit frustrated with, at least with like quantitative easing, for instance, is like, hey, what the hell? You know, we just printed like literally like $5 trillion and that just all got funneled into the banking system when we're expecting that to trickle down. People get a little perturbed, even if there's some studies out there that show, oh, this actually improves like capital efficiency and it does trickle down in some regard, and, you know, it's welfare inducing in some regard. People get a little perturbed, especially when that happens, and we don't really see like this happen during the Great Recession, and we didn't see inflation tick up significantly. But if the Federal Reserve were to say, all right, we're not seeing the inflation we want, it's the Great Recession, we're just going to give everyone $500, okay? And then let's say that we wait until next quarter. You know, inflation's still only 0.5%. Give everyone $1,000. Okay, inflation's 1.5%. We're going to give everyone another $700. Like, you know, the ramping up of that policy, I think, is so much more politically feasible than, oh, you know, we're just going to print like another $1 trillion worth of quantitative easing. Like if you took the amount of money that was printed in response to this last quantitative easing cycle, I think it was like $4 or $5 trillion. You know, obviously, if you just direct checked that out to people, maybe the inflationary effects would be different. But that obviously represents like a lot of money per person that you could, in theory, just give out as a check, and it would probably have a more direct impact on inflation and actual public welfare.
Right. I mean, right now it's extremely regressive because it just leads to asset price inflation, and you know there could be some really minor investment effects, but they seem really, really minor. So it's just, do you want a regressive, really slow reaction monetary stimulus, or do you want a super direct, super distributionally egalitarian stimulus? It seems like the more distributionally egalitarian one would be preferable.
It was literally almost $5 trillion that the Federal Reserve did in quantitative easing. That's, I don't know what that is
more
per person.
Broadly, like the argument is always that why aren't new businesses opening or why are businesses closing? Well, it's because there's not enough demand. And so if the problem is just not enough demand, like the problem, as far as I can tell, in the US economy is not insufficient access to capital. It does seem like if you can make a case for it, it's not too hard to get those loans, especially if you're a large corporation, if you're trying to get new investments. That's not the problem. The problem is not insufficient savings or insufficient wealth of investors. It's that there aren't the projects that are profitable. That was in fact exactly what we argued in the stock buyback episode, that the reason they're buying stocks back is they don't have any profitable things to invest in. Well, if that's your problem, if that's the reason the economy isn't growing at the rate you'd like it to see, simply increase demand and there will be more profitable investments. Like it seems like a very obvious solution to this. The problem is not that shareholders are too poor, in other words.
Yeah, exactly. And again, the distributional impacts are pretty obvious just because, you've got like the top 10% of people own 70-80% of the liquid wealth in pretty much every category. So obviously that's pretty rough. I did the math just quickly, $5 trillion over the entire population. That's literally $15,000 per every single American, like children all the way up to your oldest person. And so I'm not saying that obviously the inflationary impact of giving everyone $15,000 would probably be much greater than the inflationary impact of quantitative easing. And I'm also I'm not saying quantitative easing is like there's no use case for it or anything like that. Again, it's just a matter of if the goal is to induce demand and to create inflation in a recessionary environment, then it probably makes more sense to just horizontally directly induce demand. We live in a consumer-based economy. Just give people money, they'll buy more stuff with it, and they'll be better off because of it. It just makes a lot of sense.
I do think one of the additional arguments that's relevant here is politically, inflation is not feasible. So there's a background. As leftists, I think well-informed leftists often actually like higher inflation because it means you're running the economy hotter, you're running closer to capacity, more workers are being used. That'll tend to drive wages up, that'll tend to drive prices up. But that's the price we pay. So the argument goes for running as much as we possibly can in our economy. Everyone's working, everyone's contributing, everyone's getting educated, all that. So how do you offset the cost that people just seem to despise inflation? Like people just hate it when their prices go up 4, 5, 6%. Well, one solution is just have these sorts of payments which go up with inflation as well. Like if your wages aren't being kept pace with inflation because you don't have an inflation adjusted union contract or whatever, well, guess what? These payments from the federal government, the UBI, they might be. So I'm suggesting the argument that you should just have an inflation adjusted UBI and the Federal Reserve can have these little tinkerings around the edges. That will tend to take away, hopefully, the political effect of inflation. That like, yes, bread went up 3%, but so did the money the government's giving me. So it's not the sense that the government has abandoned you for the cost of pursuing higher inflation.
We're all in favor of inflation-adjusted UBI on this podcast, okay? But these extra payments from the Fed on top obviously could make a pretty big difference. And it is something that
extra deductions, right? Just to be clear, I am embracing this.
And I do find this, I do find this to be odd that it hasn't really caught on in political discourse because for some reason, politicians are okay, and you might get conspiratorial with this. I'm not trying to get conspiratorial, but for some reason, politicians are okay with the Federal Reserve printing trillions of dollars and buying open market assets and, essentially swapping those assets for cash with investors. But for some reason, nobody has seriously floated the idea of just let the Federal Reserve just give checks to people. It just seems bizarre to me.
I'm not going to claim that his suggestion was the best implementation possible, nor have I even looked into details. Jeremy Corbyn did actually suggest this policy, I believe, in 2017.
Well,
so that's probably making Mike step away from it.
I'm against it. Yeah. I just discovered many arguments against this policy.
It is funny that I actually often hear this argument, like the UBI and more broadly the tax adjustments and all these other things, giving them over to some sort of, rather than a Federal Reserve, really, it's like a macroeconomic automatic adjustment planner, whatever that body is. I often hear that actually from even center right to center, pretty far left people, just because it seems like the obvious way to extend the ability to avoid Keynesian problems with the economy, aggregate demand.
It just seems like Keynesianism. It seems like Keynesianism is just correct. It just seems like, look, if you do a shitload of stimulus during a recession, you don't get as bad of a recession. If you do regular stimulus and, kind of a post-Keynesian framework, you tend to just avoid recessions, right? It just seems like that's correct. And so, and no, you don't have these weird long-term issues with, bubbles form and the economy eventually just completely collapses. The more stimulus you do, the worse the next collapse is going to be. That just doesn't seem to be true over long periods of time. So this just seems like a very Keynesian, very almost fundamental economic way to improve recessions and improve people's lives. Yeah.
Just one sentence before Micah goes off. That's why I said I feel like people from the center right to the far left seem to be on board with this. If you're at the point where you're rejecting Keynesianism as or more broadly, the role of aggregate demand management in running an effective economy, which is sort of where I delineate the right and far right of economics, you're sort of getting into libertarian to ANCAP spaces, like you're saying, with the idea of bubbles forming and Austrian business cycle theory, those sorts of things. When you get into that space, then yeah, this all sounds insane, but those are also just not true. So who cares?
Well, as a famous leftist, Milton Friedman once said, we're all Keynesians now. We all think that recessions are endogenous. They're caused by fluctuations in the market system, and you need the government to impose some sort of stabilizing force. They're not caused, externally caused by, central bank distortions and people's incentives. And if we could find a way to perfect the central bank by implementing what we call NGDP level targeting, which I invite you all to look up, okay, as the market monetarists say. And then we use great instruments like direct cash payments and other forms of targeted monetary finance and definance. Well, then we can have the perfect form of capitalism, never a single recession, constant growth, good line goes up always. And Karl Marx's claim that the falling rate of profit will destroy capitalist society will once, finally, and for all be completely and totally shown to be the fallacious nonsense that it was. Thank you.
Technically, it could actually be more of a concern. The falling rate of profit argument relates, I think, if you want to go in a non-insane perspective, to the decreasing ability of having highly profitable investments. If the economy keeps growing, and presumably you're getting right up to that production frontier and getting even closer and even closer and even closer, the risk actually then would be that you need more federal R&D and more R&D stuff to push out the PPF so that you aren't hitting up against it. That would be the interesting argument you might get there, that you're running the economy too hot and now you need to spend more on R&D.
It's funny because there's the charitable interpretations, because I've seen neo-Marxists
to be clear, I'm not very charitable towards that interpretation. I do not like the falling rate of profit line. I just
there's something neo-Marxist, and there's cockshot, which tries to contort everything Marx said, because it has to be true. It's like those theologian apologists, which are well, the Bible says it, therefore it has to be true. So we're going to do some sort of mental gymnastics to find a way to make this interpreted correctly. But then you just look at what he actually said, and all the forecasts were wrong, and the economy did not completely collapse. And even I think the economic reasoning behind
In fairness, I think that Karl Marx is a really good critique of free market, no welfare, non-Keynesian economics. You might actually see falling rates of profit if wages didn't rise and there was no innovation because there was so little investment because of all. Anyway, moving aside from that, he's got a good critique of a thing which doesn't exist. So moving back to the thing which actually does exist, the only concern I was trying to raise is that if you do actually have line keep going up, there is an argument. And I would be interested in your theories on this. So a lot of conservative economists will argue that recessions are good because they weed out the bad businesses. I am not amenable to this argument, but I would be interested in it as a response. Is it a problem, actually, if you think that we found the solution for abolishing recessions? All those guys before, they were wrong, but we did it. We found the solution to abolish recessions. Is that a bad thing because now unproductive firms are going to survive for too long?
No, obviously not, because, you can have creative destructions without a macroeconomic recession, right? That's that's kind of one of the problems.
Yeah, cyclically induced bankruptcies are almost by definition the kind that are, taking out firms that were not stress tested, not because the merits of the firm were necessarily poor. If you're making a profit or at least you're making a sufficient profit to stay open and not liquidate yourself in a normal macroeconomic environment, seems like your business is fine. Now, I guess you say, well, why don't we just slam all of the vulnerable firms to recessions, and then we're going to force them to all go bankrupt, and we're going to have this redistribution of their capital, which is going to be good for efficiency. And that just seems really weird, because we know of all of the long-term cons of recessions almost certainly outweigh any sort of capital distributional efficiencies that it generates. And also, there's other policies which could possibly get you a better solution than every 15 years having a big recession.
I did just want to raise that because I know something that has come up in our discussions on the minimum wage is that the minimum wage seems to raise the failure rate for low productivity businesses. And I just thought it was an interesting argument because it's an argument conservatives often make. Some conservatives are just committed. Recessions are natural. They're good. And one of the reasons they're good is they raise productivity by killing the unproductive firms. And I just say, hey, I love killing unproductive firms. Let's raise the kill rate.
And again, I think that it's also I don't know, it's just kind of a mechanistic misunderstanding of this policy. Giving let's just take it to be the case that if we gave this power to the Federal Reserve, we would never have recessions because we could always stimulate demand. Well, stimulating demand by giving everyone, say, $1,000. Like, hey, we give every adult $1,000. If you have kids, we'll give you an extra $500 or something like that. That doesn't mean that the allocative efficiency of those dollars goes away. That does not logically something that makes sense. Like, people are still allocating their money because presumably, even though it's $1,500 of free money, they're still going to be conscious of how they spend it. They're still going to be aware of quality and variety and affordability and things like this. And when we see people who have access to welfare and cash benefits, I mean, certainly I don't think that we see great evidence that, welfare and cash benefits just completely destroys the allocative efficiency of an economy. Like, that doesn't seem to be correct.
Just one small note on that one. I do think it is probably true that one-time payments will tend to be slightly less efficient than regular consistent payments. Like, to me, that's the argument. That's the argument for UBI, because you're banking on getting a, like, let's call it a 1,300 check or something, right? And the next month it's 1,200, next month it's 1,400, but it's roughly in that range. You can budget for that, and you can be more predictable, and you can create these long-term plans. Even do stuff like investing in education. You can't easily do that with one-off payments, which are just suddenly there or not there.
Also, I think the way that people perceive it is different, because they just look at it as a one-time windfall, which, the perception leads them to viewing it as like this gain, which can be, allocated less carefully. That's why you see that one-time cash payment programs or temporary cash payment programs don't seem to have a huge impact on poverty long-term, because people say, I'm getting extra money, I'm going to go buy an Xbox, right? And they don't see it as like a regular part of their budget. To be used on necessities.
Well, what we're talking about,
this is one more reason that we need to have the Federal Reserve banking system, so you can have a nice little budgeting tool inbuilt, and also the free IRS filing will all be inbuilt into it, right? So we're just helping people with all these long-term plans. We're just helping them out so much. Yeah, with the 30% tax rate they're going to be paying, they better need it.
Yeah, I'm open to one-time payments being different, but I don't know. I think that people, I have to see the literature on this, but I think that people have a general understanding of the kinds of products and qualities that they would want and things that they've researched before. Like, for instance, let's just say that, it'd be nice to have a new TV, but I don't have the money for it or whatever. Like, these are things that you might generally think about across time, and then, all of a sudden the Federal Reserve says, here's $1,000, and it's like, oh, fuck, like, I'm going to go buy a TV with this. Like, I'm not just going to go pick some random bullshit TV off of the rack. Now, I'm certainly open to the idea that, hey, you're probably less cost conscious and less quality conscious with sort of, you could say, like, free money. But overall, I think that's a more marginal criticism than what, like, the libertarian would say, which is like, like you guys are saying, recessions are like taking your medicine. It's like these are a necessary thing to ensure efficient allocation of capital and creative destruction of firms. Like, that just certainly doesn't seem to be true.
And I did just want to add that my critique is that unplanned money might be particularly susceptible to this. If you do have a rules-based Federal Reserve, then there is actually some degree of predictability, even with these one-time payments. You're going to be hearing on NPR, the Federal Reserve is predicting a $400 to $600 payment in the next month or whatever. You will be actually planning for it. You may be able to add it to your budget, at least if you're like somewhat aware. The only argument I'm raising is that you would have to be even less aware if it was a regular payment. It's just something which is so obvious.
That'd be a funny, because they have betting lines for like how much the Fed is going to raise or lower interest rates. It's like, what's our check going to be this Fed meeting? Is it going to be $100?
You have a poly market for the
right.
It's really interesting, because I wonder what the political economy effect of having checks during recessions consistently means. Does it mean that having a recession under your watch actually loses you votes still, or do you actually gain votes? Because despite the fact that,
yes, because there'd still be job losses, and you're offsetting it, right?
But it would make the political pain less bad, certainly.
The job losses are with the lowest propensity voters. Usually, the lowest income people are the ones who lose their jobs because of the frictions. So I'm just saying, it's totally possible that the long-term political economy impact of a recession under that environment is 5 votes gained.
Oh, I can't hear you. I'm muted, sorry. Presumably you could extend this in two directions. One, the funnier one is just to mandate voting, which solves this problem. But two, the other way that you could take this is, even if you took a recession to be a solvable problem, as in the line didn't go down, but maybe it came closer to horizontal, there would still be a difference between running the economy really well and having the line go up faster. Presumably consumers would still appreciate really fast economic growth compared to roughly lower economic growth, right?
Actually, I think there's some evidence to indicate that people don't really appreciate like really fastly growing economies in terms of their political accreditation as we think, because people tend to think that wage increases are because of their merits and awesomeness.
That's true.
I mean, job losses and government payments are the products of policy.
We have a solution here. So earlier we're talking about having dedicated taxes and a line on your paycheck, which is like, this is due to XYZ. The solution is simply to extend that. 1, everyone's in a sectoral union. 2, the sectoral bargaining contracts include that all of these adjustments will be laid out on your paycheck and by what caused them. Oh, here's your inflation adjustment. Here's the adjustment based on your performance. Here's the adjustment on all these other things. And therefore people will start realizing, no, I'm not doing any better. It's just inflation. I'm a terrible, worthless person. And they'll vote Democrat.
And I think I want to say that Australia, I think that Australia went from, I want to say Australia went from 1991 to 2020 without a recession. They didn't have any sort of technical recession during that time period. And that's like that's like 30 years basically through multiple governments. And of course, the credit to that was very well-timed stimulus and things like that. Yeah, I mean, it's we could say that it might have had some effect on Australian political discourse, but at least
Liberal Party leadership. I'm just kidding. The Liberal Party is conservative. I do want to introduce one other policy, which is clearly underrated in this discourse, talking about culling unproductive firms. You know, a country that was really good at culling unproductive firms? South Korea, okay? They would bring in the CEOs of unproductive big firms and kill their ass, okay? I'm not saying that we should do that. I'm just saying that that's been proven to be pretty effective.
I'm
kill rate, says Micah.
Look, unironically, I think it'd be really interesting if we had a CIA, but for the IRS. IRS agents, they infiltrate wealthy families and wealthy corporations to try and discover tax fraud from the inside. Okay, I think that's an interesting idea. I haven't fully thought it through clearly. But
I have Hunger Games, we get the concept. Just take people who cheat on their taxes, right? Like you owe more than $1 million in taxes. We're going to run a big lottery device. And if your number comes up, we're putting you in the pit.
That's
and
true.
if you and the other 50 other people fight, whoever comes out alive, your taxes are forgiven. Okay.
Perhaps this coming April we can do a 3 Wonks episode on the purge and the economic implications of the purge. That could be pretty interesting. But
Friedrich, who I believe is a centrist viewer, said public hangings based. Oh no, we've gone the wrong direction on this.
But anyway, I don't know if we have much more to say about this. Overall, yeah, it sounds like we're pretty positive on the sort of the fundamentals of this idea, the idea of federal depository accounts that everyone has access to, the Federal Reserve being able to put money in those accounts, especially whenever we have low inflation, low demand, and these kind of recessionary environments, things like that, as just a way to basically increase the macroeconomic stability of a country. In terms of using it as an actual UBI, that's, I think, where we are a little bit more skeptical, just because the prospect of cutting or clawing back the UBI seems extremely politically untenable. It just doesn't seem possible, practically speaking.
And to be clear, I initially put forward that's exactly how I would want a UBI run, and I think the only way you could avoid it of being like political suicide is having it be a rules-based thing. That like we're just going to decrease it by 3% in these conditions. So what? I'm a 15-year elected official who gets like a permanent position after this. You can't hurt me, public.
Yeah, and it's one of my main criticisms for MMTers, right? Where like, for instance, we had a high inflationary environment at the same time that we had MMT discourse being very popular. As one of my biggest criticisms was, look, let's just say that we had stagflation. Now that's not quite what we had in 2022, just to be clear, because we didn't have low growth and high inflation. We had high inflation, high growth. But let's just say that we did have stagflation, right? Well, an MMTer might say, well, let's just seriously raise everyone's taxes to control inflation. Well, that seems about as unpopular as raising interest rates an incredible amount, but at least the Federal Reserve is a technocratic body. Some MMTers will come back and say, well, tax policy should be decided by technocratic bodies, right? And it's like, well, I think, again, there's some political ceilings that we're hitting here in terms of constraints. Like, I don't know if we would ever say that, tax and spending policy would be decided essentially technocratically instead of democratically. That seems a little bit surprising if that were to be
Micah leans
instituted. But no, I mean, it's something like a skinny Fed policy. Well, no, but something like a skinny Fed policy where they can send you, small and large checks during a recession. That does seem politically feasible. And I think what it'll take is just somebody just a president or Congress, really pushing that idea and getting it done. Ultimately, it's just an extra power that you'd give the Fed, and expanding public banking is a progressive priority anyway. So I think this is actually a surprisingly feasible policy to get done.
I do think that probably the likely path to this would be step one, getting some sort of public banking system, USPS or Fed banking. You have to have that for this to be easy to roll out. And then two, someone's going to pull the political trigger and make the Fed able to do it. So probably also, the prerequisite actually is USPS banking.
Also makes welfare policy in general easier because everyone has a bank account. You can deposit, like Social Security checks, child tax credit payments, veterans benefits. We can everything's going through the federal banking, depository system, right? So,
and just add one last note to it. The argument that I gave again around let's say that the macro planner board, right? They have a remit to adjust taxes. They have a remit to adjust UBI payments, but these are all bounded. Like the suggestion I gave is, let's say you can adjust the VAT up or down 3% or something. That still gives Congress the authority to set the average level of taxes, but then there's additional authority of variation around that level that you would use for macroeconomic planning purposes. So the way of thinking about it is that I think you still could square the circle of allowing the public to democratically set how high the taxes are and what they want to spend it on. But then there's just variation around that for macroeconomic.
No, that's exactly what I was. That's exactly what I was thinking. We should probably make a video on CBDCs sometime.
Oh no! Why? I don't. Why? No.
Well, anyway, guys, that was our.
Just had a meltdown. Holy shit! Okay.
That was our audience.
Oh my God.
We're closing out, guys. We're closing out. All right. This is our audience topic of the week.
We're going to get the crypto bros mad at us, okay? We're never going to recover.
We can't be sidetracked too much. But this was our audience topic of the week. Federal Reserve is a tool for UBI, or let's say demand management in general. That's the audience topic of the week, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Again, if you want to become a Patreon and vote on these policies and, of course, interact with us a little bit more directly, just become a Patreon, $3 a month. Pretty easy stuff. You get a vote. You get a say in what we talk about. Obviously, when you submit topics as well, that's how we, create these polls in the first place, is people submit topics and we outline, our general thoughts, during the show. So hope you guys enjoyed that. And there you go. That was our last audience topic. Well, guys, that was our show. Anything else that we want to talk about? Now, I will say next show, I'm going to suggest this openly. I'll say right now, the next show we're just going to be we're going to do audience topic, obviously, but we have to talk just about the election as our main topic. Okay, it's going to be right around the corner. I want each of us to come up with a map. Okay, an election map. We need to commit to a prediction on Saturday. Okay, that's a reasonable time frame. It's only a few days before. We're not going to get some crazy surprise. Okay, we can always re-release our maps later. But I think we each need to come up with an electoral college map and a Senate map as well. Go to 270 to win and make your maps. We'll present them next show.
Can I add one additional thing to this? I would be really interested with people here talking about the reasons for that map. So particular, what sources of information do you think are credible? What are not credible? And sort of just if you had to list out, here's my 5 sources of information, and if I had to give them a weighting, what percent and how important are they? I would actually be really interested in this because I feel like I have a certain number of sources, but it's possible I've missed some, and I would love to hear what y'all are interested in.
We will
MSNBC.
We will of course be talking about our logic for our maps as well. Again, it's a Senate map and it's an electoral college map. And these, again, if you want to caveat, they don't have to be locked in predictions, right? If you really think you'll change your map between Saturday and Monday, whatever, okay? But, our maps as of Saturday, I released my map as of last week, which was quite Kamala positive. We'll see what I think come 2 weeks from now. But that's what we're going to be talking about, as well as wrapping up the semifinals of the 3 Wonks policy bracket. It'll be the last round, kicking off voting that Saturday. It'll be the finale and the bronze medal match. So that'll be really fun to talk about. Our next show after that, we might be real sad. We might be real happy. The election will probably have a great determinant in what we talk about in our subsequent show.
We will be celebrating our appointment by Kamala Harris and Tim Walz to her administration. As members of the new central bank. Okay, they're going to gut the central bank and they're going to put us on there because they're frequent watchers of the 3 Wonks podcast.
This is a reminder, if you are watching this and you are an American, one of the most empirically validated things you can do to increase the vote is if you know someone is a Democrat or a likely Democrat, just ask them what their plan is to vote, how they plan to get there, like whether they've gotten the mail-in voting. Just ask them concretely how they're going to vote, and that seems to have about a 4% increase in the likelihood that they will vote. Like literally just ask them how they're going to vote, how they're going to do it, have they done it already? It could make a difference.
Yeah, and look, again, we're Democrats here, so if you've got some elderly, some disabled family members who aren't really with it, they don't really know if they can vote, just take those mail-in ballots that they get sent, just go ahead and fill it out for them, and then just submit them for them, okay? That's, a classic Democratic move. If you're a conservative, remember that the election day is November 6th. It's on Wednesday. That's when voting starts.
According to Trump.
That's true.
According to Trump.
Exactly. So
no, I think he said January 5th or something like that. He said make sure to vote on January 5th.
Yeah,
so,
please.
Yeah, that's right. If you're a center right, if you're center right to far right viewer of this audience, make sure you show up to the polls on January 5th. Okay, no earlier, no later, in person.
That's true.
Trump asks. Okay, we're just relying on what he says. But also, if you're undocumented, make sure to vote once. Vote really as many times as you possibly can, which is, I think, several dozen, frankly. Make sure you all those ballot boxes.
That's right.
He got cut out. No, Trump. If you're one of the mules, just make sure you're doing a lot of leg day, right? When you're carrying the ballots on your back across the border, right? It's that several thousand of them. It's really going to give you some cramps if you don't get some leg day in now.
And of course, look, if you're a USPS worker, naturally, if you live in a conservative county, that's where you work. Just throw out all the mail-in ballots that you get from conservative counties.
Have a little pocket shredder, just.
Exactly. Be sure to charge your shredders before you start your shift. Come November.
Oh my God.
But anyway, guys, in all seriousness, of course, make a plan to vote. We'll be talking about this in the next couple of weeks, and we'll also be talking about our electoral predictions, our maps, our feelings of the race. So it'll be maybe a bit of a less policy focused podcast. But then again, I think we've always slipped in electoral stuff, and I mean, literally presidential election. I mean, of course, we're going to mostly be talking about that on the eve of it. So, STL, final words before we hang up the recording here.
I mean, the only thing that I would say is something that I'm doing. I'm going to vote for Jill Stein because I'm going to vote trade with someone in Pennsylvania. And this is something that if you live in a blue state, you should be interested in doing. If you know someone who's a green voter, who's an undecided voter, who can't stomach voting for Kamala, usually those are people on the far left, so may or may not be you in the audience. But that's the plan. Vote trading is entirely legal. The Supreme Court decided back in 2001. It is totally fine to do. And it has a doubling of the power of your vote. So consider doing it.
What is a vote train?
A
vote trade.
Oh.
He's distributing green votes from swing states to safe blue states, basically. That's what
you do is you make a commitment. It can't be binding or financial, but you make a commitment that I'm going to vote for Jill Stein in Maryland because if Kamala loses Maryland, it's over. And someone who was a Jill Stein voter in Pennsylvania, they're going to vote for Kamala Harris. That's the idea.
Wow, that's actually really interesting. I never. That's okay. Yep. Wow.
Who are you voting for Senate, SDL?
Wait, how do I? It's. There's only one candidate, right? The only one Democrat.
Well, and there's Angela Alsobrooks versus Larry Hogan.
That's what I'm asking.
Well, yeah, that's what I was for. Oh, is there a sleeper candidate that I'm not aware? No, of course I'm voting for the Democrat.
Wrote in some green candidate or something.
Larry Hogan, he's pro-choice apparently now.
I'm still so mad about Larry Hogan. I'm in this secular group where I was, I guess, but back when Hogan was governor, and he wanted to do a school choice program in Maryland, and wouldn't you know it, 1 in 10 of those schools banned gay kids, and 1 in 6 were creationists. So I just despise him, okay? Every time the Republicans do this, they want to give a bunch of money to creationists for the dumbest school choice program on earth.
Remember, there are no centrist Republicans, okay? It really does feel that way from my perspective. You got a guy like Larry Hogan who says, I'm an independent. It's like, really? You're going to vote for Mitch McConnell to be the majority leader? You're going to vote for right-wing justices? You're going to do that? Okay, well then you're not a centrist, okay? You're going to vote for these right-wingers that are going to take away abortion and gay rights. You're not a centrist, my friend. You're just another right-winger who shouldn't have political power, all right? Don't be stupid if you live in Maryland, all right? Don't be stupid. Don't vote for Larry Hogan, all right? Don't trust him.
Are pretty promising for Alsobrooks. So I don't know that there's too much worry about that, but I feel like the dream for Democrats is that the polls are off, maybe 3 points in favor of Democrats. You just have to hope. And if so, Dems probably do take the Senate. But if it's anything close to what the polls say, I mean, I guess you know what? I shouldn't speak on this because we're going to be talking about it next time with our maps.
Talking about it. We'll have 2 more weeks of polling data to base our predictions off of. Guys, thanks for talking to us this week. Thanks for being participants in the chat. And, of course, thanks for being Patreons as well. We'll see you in a couple of weeks, and we'll certainly be talking about the election. So hopefully the polls look good for our Democrats. But, hey, we'll